This conference will now be recorded.
We'll start over.
Sorry, there's a lag. There's a lag with that button.
No worries. All right, so today is Monday, April 19th. It's 5:30 p.m. and this is the continuation of Ordinance Committee budget workshops that was recessed last week. It is now unrecessed at 5:30 today. We have a full agenda. We've got a lot of department heads waiting, and I just wanted to welcome everyone back today as we discuss fiscal year 22 budget proposal by Mayor Hoydick, who has once again lowered the mill rate to 39.60 mils. So before we get started with moving on with the departments, I just wanted to point out that from our last discussion last week, it was clarified that the potential COVID-related expenses for fiscal 22 were not requested of department heads as these expenses are unknown. Therefore, the budget 22 request is based on normal operating procedures. Our finance director has created a contingency COVID line in the general fund to record these types of expenses for state reporting purposes. And because of this, all COVID related questions are considered asked and answered. So we do have some questions that several council people have already sent in ahead of time, and for that I appreciate it. And of course, we will allow time for further discussion. So with no further ado, let's get started with the town attorney, and that's on page 14 of your book if you're following along. And for that, we have Attorney Hodgson with us. I believe there he is.
Point of order, Chairman.
Mr. Can.
Thank you. The item under contingency, supposedly where the COVID items have been recorded, although it's not reflected in the proposed budget, we will be able to ask questions related to those expenses when it comes to contingency.
When we get to contingency, you could discuss that.
Thank you.
Attorney Hodgson, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleased to submit our budget. That is basically the same budget that was approved last year. We have a slight increase above what we had proposed in the liability line, which went from $350,000 to $450,000. That is based upon the council approved solar settlements. We are committed to make payments on that settlement in the upcoming fiscal year. So other than that, it's the same budget. We have a line also for our legal fees. Last year, we did not exceed those fees, but of course, it's a pandemic year and courts were closed. So I believe that the number we use is prudent because we're anticipating that courts will be open and back to normal. I think it was scheduled for 2 weeks. So that would account for the prudent number of $985,000 for general legal fees, and then the labor would cover at least 2 law firms, and we have labor contracts to negotiate. So if we can bring our legal fees in under that number, which I have my fingers crossed, and we're doing everything we can to do that, we're going to make every effort, but I believe that the budget number itself is solid. And I would ask for any questions.
Thank you, Attorney Hodgson. So you got the questions ahead of time from Councilor Can, and I believe that a lot of that was just answered in your opening. If there's anyone who would like to ask further questions for Attorney Hodgson, I will recognize you.
Councilman Can.
Go ahead, Mr. Can.
Thank you, Ms. Danko. If we were to look at revenues, we'd see a number of accounts are substantially below their collection rate. And Attorney Hodgson, you've just mentioned that some of our expenses for extenuating circumstances could also be below because courts were closed, et cetera. Legal fees for labor. we may need wronging, but the trend, do we have a projected trend on the fees? Are the contracts all bunched together so that they hit at one time? Or what contracts do we see coming up in 2022 that we did not complete in 20 or 21? Because
Well,
for
they
20,
expire at different times.
yep.
We're on generally on a three. Oh, I'm sorry. Have you finished your question?
No, go
Gone.
ahead. Thank you.
Zoom. All right. The contracts are on different cycles, so it could be 3 or 4 years. So, for example, this year, the dispatcher contract ends on June 30. The police contract ends on June 30. I believe Public Works ends on June 30.
I don't
That's the
know what
sound
that
effect I add.
Public Works is extended.
And there is feedback. If it's me, I've just called in once. But using those 3 examples, do we anticipate those contract negotiations, using those 3 examples, to run into 2022 and therefore affect contingency, let alone legal fees? Or would we complete them on time and therefore not exacerbate our 2022 expenses?
I think it's more likely that they would go past July 1. So we're just starting to meet, and hopefully we would get them done. But just if history is any guide, a lot of these contracts end up running into that next fiscal year.
It's some fun background noise.
That was a good one.
All right. My questions are answered for now. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other counselor who would like to address Attorney Hobson? All right, seeing none, thank you for joining us tonight, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Best meeting I've been at in months. Thank you.
Let's keep it going. So next on the agenda is the mayor's budget. That's on page 11 for those of you that are following along. And we have Chris Timniak here and Don Savo, who will speak to the mayor.
Right, I'd like to present the next couple of budgets, if I may. The mayor's budget is on page 11. It is a $2,000, roughly $2,000 increase over last year's increase. That falls in the payroll line. We do right now have a vacancy in the payroll with Chris Bendecki, who has left. We are looking to fill that position and don't anticipate that position being open for any budgetary savings in that. So we'd like to keep that at the same. Moving down, education and travel is remaining the same based upon commitments we have for college or any educational reimbursement we need to put in. This year we are having more. You'll hear that from me because of additional trainings which are required, whether it's racial bias training, sexual harassment training. More and more trainings are coming down, and I don't know how to anticipate what's going to be required for the next fiscal year today. So I think it's prudent to leave that number where it is. Printing and stationery remains the same as the previous year. Outside services is also going to remain the same at $10,000. This line is used for everything from adding, additional consultant, which may need to come in for various projects which come up. I can give an example. We currently have the solar group, which we have right now, which we initially worked with that, and then I moved them over to another line. So it's used for different areas which are going to provide benefits for the town based upon initiatives which come from the mayor's office. Printing and reports remains the same at $2,100, and other contingency is also going to remain the same at $10,000. I'm available for any questions if you have any.
Does anybody have any questions regarding the mayor's budget to Mr. Timniak?
Greg Can.
Hey, Greg.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Chris, thanks for being here today. My first question was not previously submitted, but it's back to the training items that you mentioned. And I want to say this with a straight face, so excuse any innuendo. Recently, we passed a resolution that the town and its employees are conscious of racism and we're not racist. I go to mandatory annual trainings on these topics, but if this is not a condition for the town of Stratford, why do we need town employees to be trained in cultural sensitivity and racial bias?
I think any training's good if an employee wants to do it, and I mean it's an option which is available to everybody. It doesn't need to be a requirement. In this situation, especially the racial and bias thing, it's what's going on right now. Employees should be educated about the different views and perspectives which are out there right now, especially from leading experts across the country. It keeps us well informed and up to date.
That's a fair response. Next question is regarding stipends. I don't know what the current stipends are. I'd like to learn that. And I'd also like to learn why we do not list, since stipends have been a predicted annual expense, why they're not separately reported as an item on the budget.
So stipends have always been a point of contention going back to when I first started. Stipends were in excess of, 13 to 15 employees going back years ago. Right now we have it down to about four to five employees. A lot of those are seasonal based. A lot of times a stipend will come into play when an employee leaves and another responsibility needs to be picked up. Every stipend we currently have is utilized so that we don't have to hire another position. So it saves money when we ask an employee to step up. I did a list of the employees right now. And we currently have 5 people which are getting regular stipends, and none of those stipends which are regularly are more than $5,000 per year. And those are absorbed either in the payroll line or another line when an employee leaves, or however we're going to pay for that project. It gets absorbed in there. It's not something which we want to put in the budget. It is something which is non-pensionable. We also don't match it's not included in the employee salary, so it doesn't require us to make a match on that as well. If an employee wants to have it contributed to their any one of their funds they may have in place.
I don't need the names of the employees right now, as long as we're conscious of that.
I would just, this is,
Go ahead, Dawn. Go ahead, Dawn.
no, I was just going to say it comes out of salary. I did go. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, and to Chris's point that salaries can be an estimate of, say, pension or 401k liabilities, so that we're as transparent as possible, and that seems to be a wish for everyone that's on the call. We itemize many things, that are much less than $25,000. So what I'm requesting is, because it's not regular salary, and it's that we do separately list it, so that we remain transparent in regards to the full compensation. I appreciate that we're not having to hire another employee to do a particular function, but the cost of these temporary, they're not even temporary, the cost of these additional payroll costs, like other payroll and benefits, should be itemized in the budget. Is that something that we can do when we publish the actual 2022 budget?
Well, they're sort of broken out at the back when you can see that, a salary split, whether it's.
I will look into it.
Sorry.
Yeah,
You can.
just go ahead, Chris.
A salary split, like, I mean, in the back page of the book, page 67, you can see where the mayor/IT director, 80%, and then 20% comes from the IT side. You know that the CBDG is split out through stipends. EOC is part of an EOC grant. And a lot of the stuff is unpredictable because it's seasonal and it's based upon employees stepping up to fulfill a duty if someone were to leave. Think of an example of the new a legal assistant, Barbara, who's filling in for Gail. Well, Gail used to do an extra item which wasn't included in the job description, and we're working right now in trying to get Barbara to take on that role so that I don't have to backfill that with another position. But it's when you're stepping outside your regular duties or regular job description to put something in place. And ideally, I don't want to have it roll into the salaries. I do want to be as transparent as possible. I'm happy to give you a list of who currently gets stipends if you'd like.
Well, it's only that the list. You've mentioned some situations where a stipend is on an as-needed basis, but we also have situations where the stipends can be predicted ahead of time and are annually reoccurring. It's those cases plus some normal as needed. It would be nice to see how we're progressing on a year-to-year basis in isolation from regular salaries.
We can have that. I'm happy to have that conversation. I'll give you the list, and if you want that additional included, we can talk about that then. So that's my hesitancy on that.
I would think that listing out stipends would almost be a duplication of salary, because I believe that if someone's getting a stipend, the person that they're getting a stipend for isn't generating their salary. Is that not the case? Or would a stipend be in addition to whoever that replacement person is who's still being paid?
You're right, Councilwoman Dams. It's in addition to the salary. It's harder to do. I understand
So the
what.
stipend is.
Go ahead, Dawn. I think you're on a delay. I understand Councilman Can's request, and I will. I'll try to. Joe.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Chris and Dawn. One other question that was previously submitted. This has to do with how many of the grants that we receive are not reoccurring, or they might be 1 or 2 year in duration. This happens frequently with community services and the health department. And I can see where those would not be in the budget. But we have an entity like the HUD CDBG grant, which has been for over 20 years consistent in its contribution to the town. Although the level of contribution may vary, we tend to take 10% of that and use it to fund various administration expenses. So while the revenue side of the budget reflects many grants, and I think we can assure ourselves that those grants are not guaranteed. Like the ECS grant we get can go down. Recently, we've been lucky and it's gone a lot. Why would we not put the CDBG income in the revenue side so we can then reflect the true cost of salaries that are funded through that funding source?
I'll let Dawn answer that question.
So this is Dawn. Hi, this is Dawn. I don't know. Can you hear me okay? Am I good?
I can now.
All right.
You're okay.
I'm just gonna shut off my video because, all right. I'm stopping my webcam just because I think it's impeding my bandwidth here. But so the CDBG grant is, as you know, a HUD grant, and I'm not sure why why this is being asked, because the HUD grant has to be kept, it's kept in a separate fund. It's not in the general fund. It's got its own fund. It's a multi-year, what we call a multi-year fund. So unlike the general fund, which closes out at the end of every year, and we start afresh the next year with an expense and a revenue budget, we don't do that with the HUD grant. So that is a multi-year, like a lot of our other, we have another fund where we keep a lot of the health and the community service grants because they run multi-years and we have to carry that money forward. We need to account for it separately. I don't know any other town that puts their money from CDBG into the general fund. What they normally do is if there's a person that's serving, you know, has a split job, then maybe a portion comes out of the grant funding and then a portion would be in the general fund. And a lot of towns do that. And I think that's what you're referencing, Greg. But the fund, the CDBG money cannot be revenue in the general fund. It needs to be in its own fund.
Thank you.
Did that answer?
Yeah, so Laura, one to follow up.
All right, but
The,
make sure that it's, or Greg, make sure that it's in relation to the mayor's budget portion, okay?
Oh, absolutely. Let's confirm, is Chris Bandecki itemized under the mayor's, is his function itemized under the mayor's budget?
Mr. Timniak stated
No.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
I just
No.
wanted to, I just wanted to re-verify. I just wanted to re-verify that I am still
Mr.
on the mayor's budget.
Can
So
you hold on one second? The mayor would like to respond.
If you look at the schedule in the back of the book, it says the mayor's assistant, and part of his salary, or that position's salary that's funded by the general fund, is in there, not his CDBG administrator salary. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Councilwoman.
thank you, Mayor. I guess that's to my point exactly, that if we had the hard time of losing CDBG and we could not access it to pay for, then the general fund would need to be utilized to retain that individual, even though part of that individual's responsibilities would now be gone due to the run out of CDBG.
Possibly, necessarily. That's not, the position is an at-will employee. And as with all grant-funded positions, you've heard Andrea Boyce-Van, Health Director, and Tammy Trojanowski, Community and Senior Services Director, talk that if it's grant-funded, the employee knows that that funding source may be or may be eliminated at any time. And so they know that when they take these positions.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mayor.
thank you, Mayor. I'll close with a recommendation that while the community and health departments do not reflect those funded positions in their FTE, that in this case, the mayor's office does reflect a position whose funding is dependent upon the grant. So if there was some illustration in the budget as to the funding source, that would be more transparent so that the council and its budgetary function could understand the consequences, not just on the recipients of the grants, but also on its potential impact to how our administration is funded. Thank you for this opportunity to ask question.
So, Councilwoman Dancho,
Yes.
the position in the mayor's budget is not listed that way. So it, and the salary item, even though it's listed as one number of personnel, the supplemental salary is from the CDBG. So if you would like a list of all grant employees, we can provide you that as well.
Okay, I'm finished with the mayor's topic. Thank you, Ms. Danko. Done.
All right, so
Done.
Greg, one more time. Pronounce my name
Mr.
correctly.
Khan,
Dancho.
Mr. Khan,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mr. Khan. Every time you say it wrong, Greg, I'll call you Mr. Khan, okay? Thank
It's
you,
going to be a
Greg.
long night.
Do
I
it.
could tell. It's
Craig Khan. I got it.
So I would like to recognize Mr. Tavares now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Dancho. This question's probably towards Mr. Timniak or Ms. Savo. I know Mr. Timniak mentioned about the solar arrays, and I've been meaning to ask a question that the installation of those arrays to our schools is going to incorporate a substantial savings to Stratfordites. But I want to know, with the credit, how is that credit reflected in the budget? And how is that going to be, how is that going to affect our budget and those savings? And where is it, if you can tell me, please?
So the budget savings is going to be on the Board of Ed side. We spoke with the Board of Ed earlier on. They were fully aware of this coming in. They got the estimates as well. They did not budget for the 100% of what a full year is because they're not quite sure when the installation is going to be finalized. We will have a better understanding of what the solar array and the benefit will be in next year's budget. We do look forward to substantial savings from it, but I have nothing in my budget to show you for that.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Tavares. Is there anyone else who has a question for Mr. Timniak or Don Savo regarding the mayor's budget? Seeing none, we will move on to the next topic, Chief Administrative Officer, page 15, and that is going to be Chris as well.
This is a pretty straightforward budget on what last year's was. I do want to break down the payroll part-time is $75,000. Right now, we increased it last year because we weren't sure what I was going to have to pick up for COVID responsibilities. I ended up with a floater in the budget. I ended up with a grant writer in the budget. I also have someone who is doing the door every single day, which turned out to be multiple people over the course of this fiscal year. I've included that as an operating procedure for next year as well. I don't know what it's going to entail. So that's why the payroll part-time is at $75,000 as it was the previous year. Education remains the same. I still provided any conferences or training for 2 full-time employees in my budget. Printing and stationery, we end up helping with townwide mailings or other departments which need to send out letters to residents. We pick that up in addition to the stationery, which comes out other lines. And the printing and the reports includes everything from budgets to other expenditures we get for printing reports for the CAFR report or anything which comes in along those lines, which we have to provide to the council, to the public, to the libraries along that. So in total, my budget was a slight increase. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Timniak. Are there questions for the CAO office?
Greg Can.
Mr. Can.
Yes, I'll start with my previously submitted questions. I'm sorry Chris did not get a copy of them, but
I was given a copy today when I got back from vacation
Last week. Yeah.
last week.
well, Welcome back. Hope the vacation was rewarding. General question about strategic planning, Chris. Day-to-day management of just the dynamic of the organization versus planning for future initiatives. Is there, just to help us understand the distribution of the time your office spends on today versus tomorrow?
It's funny you say that. I was with Dawn this morning and we were already talking about different things we may have to institute for the fall. Lots of things which come across this office aren't designed to save money today. They're designed to save money in the future. Lots of programming, as you know, what we propose to the council does not automatically happen. It takes months in the works to get to, think about, Stratford High or, any of the big engineering projects John Casey's working on right now. A lot of it has to be queued up. And we do spend a fair amount of time about, determining what we can handle today, and we try to slide it in, whether it's with Public Works saying, wait a second, I've now just given Public Works 7 things to do. There's no possible way they can get all this done in the next week or so. We need to sort of schedule this out a little bit more. A lot of it is pre-planning right now to what we can do in the school in the summer, in the summertime when the school's not in. We're having conversations about playgrounds right now and getting ready for summer camp. A lot of that stuff, when we're talking about parks, now is the time to start opening about parks. A lot of that is planning in the future, 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road. I know that Dawn and I regularly meet and we talk about next year's contractual expenses, and we have to start incorporating those moving forward. So it is definitely something which is part of my daily structure.
All right. Thank you for the juggling. My next question will be trying to look forward. It's not a comment on our prior grant writers or our current grant writers. It's more reassurance that if there are opportunities for a municipality to apply for a grant, that we have the appropriate resources to identify those opportunities, author it correctly, actually file it, and then win as many as we can. And the idea is, just strategic development, being competitive in the marketplace. Can you speak to, in the questions that you see, it's asking questions related to inventory of grants, not previously filed, but newly filed, incremental value of those, grant opportunities we've identified, but not yet pursued. Do you maintain such a list so that we can measure our progress towards being, quote, most competitive in the grant acquisition marketplace?
I think in the last year and a half, we've exceeded other municipalities for grants applied for and grants won. I think Dawn can give some specifics about some grants we've gotten recently. I speak to Greg Riley, our current grant writer, who is he's head and shoulders the best grant writer I've worked with since I started here right now, here with the town. I'm concerned about his band. I talk to him about how he's managing his time, and then I'll go back and I'll talk to the department heads about the importance of the grant they're putting in and making sure that the information we're getting to Greg is packaged up neat and tidily so that it doesn't spend as much time with Greg so that he can continue to apply for more and more. So it's something I monitor pretty closely. I am very happy with the production we're getting right now from the grants we're applying for and winning. And on a national level, we're winning these. These aren't, we're winning the local ones, but we're winning national grants right now, and it's because of the team we have in place.
Without adding to administrative overhead, could you take the opportunity to list some of the national grants that have been out there that we've not previously had an opportunity? Maybe they're new grants, I don't know. But that's a great concept, that we're competing with national municipalities, just not in our own backyard. It's just more could you provide an illustration of a few of those successes in
Well,
a,
I mean,
or a short, at a later date.
I would prefer to do it at a later date.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss the
No.
obvious.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll go on. Within your purview is, I'll say, the management of town services. Laura, this is page 18 in the budget, but it's within Chris's scope of responsibilities. And my first question is related to the fire hydrants. The fee of maintaining those fire hydrants is increasing in the proposed budget. And previously, I've submitted questions related to the schedule of maintenance. Does Aquarium have an obligation to maintain, to report on their maintenance schedule, to report on the frequency of their, whether they're on time, et cetera? Can you speak to the fire hydrants, please?
I can. Aquarium does report. Dawn can give a little more details. It is a bill which I'm becoming increasingly frustrated with the increases. It seems to be something which is out of control right now, but if Dawn wants to, it's in the regulator's control, not ours, and it's based upon the total number of fire hydrants we have in the town. Dawn, if you want to add something from Aquarium.
Sure. So when I budget for this, what we do is we get a letter every year from Aquarian that is sent to the mayor that tells us what to anticipate based on their anticipated regulated rate increases for the hydrants. And then that letter it's usually based on a calendar year, which we don't budget on a calendar year. So I have a contact at Aquarian that I reach out to, and they send me a spreadsheet breaking it out for the fiscal year. So there's always a little difference between that and the letter. And it's a very detailed breakout, and they explain what potential rate increases will be for the hydrants. They're based on a foot-inch calculation, and then like an additional fee per hydrant. So it's usually pretty accurate. And I then look at the previous 3 years and see where we came in according to that estimate. And that's how I come up with the estimate in the budget. Because remember, it's an estimate. That's what a budget is. It's not, these aren't exact numbers, but we try to, get the best information we can to make an educated estimate. And in terms of their maintenance schedule, I do not know that, but we can certainly look into it. And that's a good question. And I can talk to my contact there, find out, and send you an email, Greg, and anybody else who wants to know.
Thank you, Dawn.
That the obligation is mutual. It's a two-way conversation, right? Also within the purview of the CAO's office, sorry for mispronouncing your department title, Chris, are operating transfers. We're seeing in this proposed budget a reduction of the town's investment in redevelopment and open space. With a concern for future economic development and strategic growth of the town, why is this an appropriate time to reduce our investment in open space and redevelopment?
So,
Chris,
what do you want to do?
Yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
Oh, hi, this is Dawn again, and I'm actually just going to that page. I think it's near the end.
It's 5.7.
Thank you. So the operating transfers, as you know, are transfers out to other funds outside of the general fund where we can accumulate money to use in multiple years. So like I had mentioned earlier, and Greg, I'm saying this for everybody's benefit, not yours, who you probably know this already, but for the outside people as well. That when we transfer money out, taking it out of the general fund, putting it into another fund for said purpose that the council has approved via charter, to create a fund, and we move the money into that fund, and then this way we can accumulate it beyond the general fund year, beyond the normal fiscal year. Sorry. So we've been putting this in, they anticipate potential need or what's in the fund. So in the past 19 and 20, we put 75,000 each in those. This past year, we put 150. And then for next year, we anticipated possibly selling some property. So I dropped that down to 50. And then I increased the reval fund because, as you know, we are required to do the reval every 5 years, and that's a large expense. So the fund was slightly low, so we needed to bump that up. So I kind of just was balancing out some things in the other funds, really. It wasn't a decision to not invest because we have money in the funds to invest. It's just a decision on how much we were going to put in this year. And, you can certainly make a recommendation that, that gets increased if you so wish.
So that's one level. Another level is that.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so that's one level. Another level is that, we're anticipating DEP open space grants this year. We were given a lot of COVID money, which includes money for outdoor recreation. So we saw a lot of money coming in this year. And in addition to the, financial details Dawn outlined, this is a big opportunity right now. It's a big opportunity for us this year, and I hope that we're in position to take advantage of those opportunities from other sources without having to burden the taxpayers.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chris, so Don mentioned that, we have these separate funds, outside of the general fund, and that, for example, she mentioned selling property, which could then feed our open space fund. In the budget, we have $160,000 on the sale of land going to the general fund. Should that money gained from the sale of land not be directed to the open space fund?
I mean, it can be. It goes to the general fund first. I wouldn't do that budgetarily, to say I anticipate $160,000 coming in, and then I'm not going to put on the other side of the ledger $160,000 to the open space fund. If the council wants to direct that money when the money comes in per the sale, it's an option which would be open at the time. I do anticipate hitting the $160,000 mark this year for land sale.
And we don't have a regulation or an ordinance that says land sales should have proceeds transferred to the open space fund.
I would refer to the town attorneys on that, but in lots of situations when we do finally make a sale, we could be responsible for returning money to RDA based upon the investment they put into it. We could, there are other areas along the line, and a lot of times properties are held and maintained for a fair amount of time. In some situations, I can think of one right now where we've held a property based upon taxes. When we sell it, we're going to have to reimburse the back taxes owed on the property before I commit the entire amount to open space. So it's a case by case basis. And when the property sells, the council definitely gets a vote on approving the sale of the property.
Would the council also get a vote on how the proceeds are distributed?
I don't see why not.
I would say if you vote for the budget, yeah, you have some say. If you don't vote for the budget, then you don't.
Yeah, that's so. But if I don't vote for this budget, then I've negated my opportunity to speak on any future ordinance.
No, I'm saying if you didn't vote for the budget, you're not going to vote for the budget, then your input into changing it is negated because you won't be considered because you're not voting for the budget. Why would you have say if you don't plan to vote for it anyway? Why would you continue on?
Okay, so the purpose, to answer the councilman's question, we've just had a topic on reducing investment in open space. And I will be proposing an amendment to restore that investment so the town has sufficient funds to obtain properties for that specific purpose. I will also be putting in an amendment on the revenue side so that the gain on sale of land, the net proceeds, if you will, after taxes, et cetera, is also delivered to the open space fund, as that's been our historical practice. And that if we're selling capital assets like land, then it, in my opinion, the proceeds should go for a similar purpose, which acquire other land. So if I enter the amendments, Mr. Councilman, would that satisfy your level of whatever that I have adequately participated?
Here, Mr. Can, if you just give me 1 second, I'm going to step in here and I'm just going to say that your potential future amendments are duly noted, and we're just going to move on here because this isn't about open space right now. So if there's any other questions from another counselor, Mr. Timniak, please let me know. And if not, we're going to move forward with this agenda.
Councilor Dancho, Bill O'Brien.
Go ahead, Mr. O'Brien.
I wanted one clarification. I thought I heard Mr. Can say that the fire hydrants budget increased. Did I hear that correctly?
I believe you did, but they did
because
not.
Because it's a decrease of $127,625. But anyhow, Chris, I had one thing to bring up. You didn't mention in talking about your daily duties and that of Dawn, I would think it's going to greatly increase with managing the COVID money and figure it out the federal guidelines. Is that correct?
It's absolutely correct. It's an intimidating prospect of making sure that we follow these guidelines so that we're not going to have to reimburse thing, down the future for something we did. So it's something we've had many meetings about, and I look forward to finally getting the guidelines from the federal government. They're saying that we should get them sometime in May, at that time, that's going to take some time to figure out how to properly spend the money.
Well, thanks, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Anyone else have questions for Mr. Timniak? All right, seeing none, we're going to move ahead. Thank you, Chris. We're going to go ahead to Human Resources is next, page 13, and I see Mr. Eng is ready to go.
Yes, good evening, everyone. As you can see in our budget, we have a slight increase. We did make some adjustments, obviously in payroll. There's also a reduction in our education and travel, a slight decrease in our printing and stationery. We did have an increase for our drug testing for active employees. There's a couple of reasons. One is the HB 6400 for the police department. There's some additional testing that we have to add to our panel, but also due to COVID, we've had to do some catch up from the previous year to maintain our contractual obligations on testing percentage-wise of employees. So when we delayed some of the testing for this past year or so, we anticipate having to do some catch up in the next fiscal year. In general, the ad placement, if you go down to skip the employment testing, because that's pretty much the same. The ad placement went down a little bit because we're not using ads anymore, really. We're doing more working with some of the department heads and using their associations that doesn't cost us any money to provide some additional postings for us instead of going through the internet and using Indeed or Monster or whomever may be out there. There's also a slight increase in our pre-employment exams, and that's just due to, I don't have all the information yet from them, but Harvard Healthcare has increased some of its services already since they took over St. Vincent's. We're still feeling a little bit of the impact on that. They haven't completed everything. And as you can see, for the pre-employment physicals, it went up a little bit as well because of their increased costs. I'm hoping that we don't see anything future-wise, but I've been told that they're still looking at everything from the town. So I'm fairly comfortable that we should be okay where we are at. Other than that, I think we're pretty much level on the remaining items of our budget. So if anybody has questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Eng. Does anyone have any questions at this time for Mr. Eng? Any other counselors?
Including me?
You submitted your questions in advance, and you have the floor, Mr. Can.
Thank you, Laura. Ron, I'm reflecting on our healthcare costs and the trend over time and a 15% bump for this proposed budget. We'll talk about that later, but the questions were new initiatives that would improve workplace safety, OSHA type initiatives that would minimize the risk of injuries, and also initiatives that would improve employee self-care that would mitigate health risks that could lead to disease. Understanding our contracts and some of the limitations that they impose, how have we done with integrating some of these risk-reducing behaviors into our employee contracts?
Well, as always, and we continue to do so, is we do have training that's provided to our employees. Obviously, police and fire have obviously some statutory requirements, and EMS as well. But in all our other groups, we are providing additional training. We have worked with both our PMA, who handles our workers' comp insurance, and Gallagher Insurance, which is part of Merit, is part of that Gallagher group that does a lot our general liability and additional insurances. And we've incorporated their new offering of some trainings that do not cost us any additional dollars. So we have had Public Works in particular take advantage of that. We've had a few town hall locations take advantage of looking at carpal tunnel type of situations to prevent carpal tunnel. So we have actually implemented those, and we always continue to do so as we expand those. But as you mentioned, a majority of the restrictions are on our union contracts. Every time we have a union contract that comes up, we always propose a health and wellness program to be put in there. Our health beneficiary insurance company, Anthem, as well as our broker consultants, Brown & Brown, we present those types of programs to the unions. Unfortunately, the unions don't accept those proposals because it requires them to adhere to certain guidelines, and they feel that might be damaging to their membership should those people not live up to the wellness side of it. So we still bring it up every single time. We try to get everybody to participate. We have always worked with the health department. Obviously, this year was a little cumbersome with the COVID, but every year we always have a health department and us work with the health clinic that we provide various vendors coming into town hall. Predominantly, they go to the Chamber of Commerce. Actually, not Chamber of Commerce. They go to council chambers, and we clear that area out. So we have various vendors coming up there to provide their services and try to address health and wellness. We still send out all our memos and newsletters that come from Anthem regarding health and wellness. So on a monthly basis, when they come in, we make sure that they're distributed to all our employees, and hopefully they read them and take advice from those wellness newsletters.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Laura.
Any other counselors have a question for HR? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Eng, for being with us tonight.
You're welcome.
We are going to move on to contingency accounts. That's on page 22 of your booklet. 22.
Dawn, do you want to start contingency?
Yes, thank you.
So, Dawn,
So,
I'm going to Dawn, before you start, Dawn, you have a delay, so I'm thinking it might be best to turn off your video again, unfortunately. So we can hear you, understand it, so we don't get any garble. There you go.
Okay. So
I guess there's a emergency going on. Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Our fire department at work. Okay.
okay, that was kind of loud.
Thank you, Dawn.
So contingency contains a variety of line items that do include purchased insurance, and I'll just speak to some of the ones that related to the questions we received ahead of time. So the purchased insurance is handled by, this is our liability account. So the liabilities of the town for building, for fire, auto, property damage, that's also known as LAP. This is what this insurance would cover, and our umbrella coverage. And this is handled by a broker. And this year we're actually going to market on this. We just had a meeting with our broker and strategized about how we were going out to market on this. We ask our broker for an estimate of what we think it's going to be at the time we do the budget, because we're not really 100% in sync with our coverage periods and our budget year when we need this information. So the estimate we were given was 10%, and that's what I increased it by for the budget. The when we go out to market, there's a whole, actually Ron, Chris, and I are working on this now. There's a whole series, a package that we have to put together with a lot of information, a lot of data that goes out, and then they nationally go out to market and get pricing for us that we'll review, and then we'll also take a look at what some of our retainers, our retainage is. One of the things that we're being told is due to COVID and just, weather patterns and just the market in general nationally, is that we can definitely anticipate an increase in the cost. It's just the market, they use the term hardening, is hardening, and so prices are going up all across the US. So it's not just for Stratford. One of the other items on here was that was touched upon at the last budget meeting was the unanticipated expense. And that's, again, it's an estimate. Last year we had 400, this year 330. The reason why I didn't feel like we needed to increase that was because we have so much outside COVID money potentially coming, well, we know it's coming. We just don't know exactly everything we can use it for, but we know it's COVID related. So, that's upwards of $20 million. And so I didn't feel like we needed to increase this line item for taxpayers at this time. And then the other item, like contract settlements, that's based on, and Chris Hodgson alluded to this earlier, that's based on what we work with Ron on this, what we anticipate potentially we might need when we settle any labor contracts. And this year, because it's police and dispatch, those are larger unions and they have higher pay rates. So the number is considerably larger than what was estimated last year for the supervisors union. So I hope that answers those questions.
Thank you, Dawn.
Oh, and the work comp, I I don't know, is that, I didn't address that, sorry. The workers' comp is, again, this is an estimate. We have a firm that we use that gives us an estimate of what they anticipate the workers' comp to be, and they have all of our data. We are self-funded for the town for workers' comp and our medical. And for those of you that might not be familiar with that, we basically take this money that we budget for and we move it into an internal service fund, which is another fund outside the general fund, and that's where all the expenses flow through that fund. So this is the amount that's needed to put into that fund for next year based on what's in the fund and what expenses we had this year and what we anticipate for next year.
Thank you for that explanation, Dawn.
You're welcome.
Greg Can.
Mr. Can.
Thank you, Laura. Let's, Don, go back up to purchased insurance. So far, year to date, we've only spent 12% of the current year's budget allocation. Are there big bills that would be coming due over the next 3 months that would get us up?
Yeah. Thank you for noticing that, Greg. So we paid this through a wire transfer, and I just haven't done the journal entry to post it on our books yet, but it's been paid. The majority has been paid. There's some smaller outstanding. So that's just a delay on my part. I just was really focused on getting some other big items off my desk, and I didn't do the journal for that yet. And Chris, I just want to for everybody, Chris lost his audio, so he's in my office.
I'm trying to reset.
Oh. Okay.
Chris Timney said.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Greg?
No, GL entry has not been entered, so got it.
Yeah.
The under contract settlements, for the current year, we put aside like $147,000 for the supervisors union, and the budget reflects $285 for the police and the dispatchers, and then there was a third union mentioned by someone. How many employees are in the supervisors versus the police and the dispatchers?
Oh boy, that might be a better question.
I'll answer that question.
Rough number.
There's about 35, 38 supervisor union members. And the police have about 108, 110. And dispatch has 13 total, 12 actually total, I believe. We just added the last one, so it's 12 total in dispatch, excluding the supervisors.
And I just like to say 71 of the budget, there's actually a compensation table key that lists the different unions and the number of personnel.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that reference. So I'm thinking, since our town attorney mentioned that these negotiations will not be completed by the end of the year, which is unfortunate, but happens. The town has often had these contract settlements upwards of over $1 million, $1.5 million. Those were worst cases. Since the police and the dispatchers are relatively 3 times the number of employees versus the supervisors union, why are we not, knowing that we're going to have a delayed settlement and therefore we're going to have to issue back pay, back compensation, should we not right-size the contract settlement to reflect the duration of the negotiation plus the number of impacted employees?
Well, in my experience, I think that it's prudent we do salary calculations, we take a lot of time to go through and apply step increases and potential contractual increases to come up with a very good estimate. And I just think it's prudent to, because those are contractual, that we should have a contingency for that. Because remember, this is a contingency line. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to spend it, but we should have a, you know, a good contingency number, because you know, if that does happen, we are, you know, we're putting ourselves at risk not having that and being able to negotiate good faith for that.
Oh,
Councilman,
go ahead, Chris.
the town attorney said they might be delayed, and we have a very good track record of resolving contract disputes relatively timely compared to, you know, other towns which can take, you know, additional months, if not years. And I don't anticipate that happening in this situation at all. And I think we're definitely budgeting the correct way for this.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that was the, that's good reassurance. You know, I'm just looking at some historical patterns, but as long as we're conscious of the risk of maybe coming up short. All right.
Mr. Pan, if you don't mind, I want to add one quick thing on that. The supervisors union also is based on a different type of base salary than the other ones. So the typically supervisors union has a higher base salary on their contracts. So the anticipation is, yes, we might have some back pay to PD and dispatch, but on a base pay wise, it's less. Just FYI.
Excellent. I'll go now to unanticipated expenses. Dawn mentioned that, you know, at our last discussion when we were with finance, that more money would be added here to pay for COVID-related expenses. And so I was concerned that that money wasn't represented. But the point that we're getting from the ARPA, a $20 million on the town and $20 million on the BOE, big gift, if you will, which we will put to appropriate use, I'm sure. I can see how, you know, because we recognized as revenue about $700,000 of state money in our current year budget. So if we recognize the state money as a revenue to offset COVID-related costs, should we not also recognize the ARPA money, because it's for the same purpose, just from the feds, not the state, as an offset to our anticipated COVID-related expenses?
I would not. We don't even have that, you know, I would definitely not do that. I would not do that. I would not recommend doing that. The money that is in the budget is part of the governor's municipal aid package, as I, you know, mentioned at the last budget workshop, and that's, you know, aid to the town. It's, as I mentioned, it was I listed it with the wrong wording. It's actually distressed municipality funding, and I have no regulations on that in terms of, you know, if it's for COVID or not. So it's just aid as relief to.
Yeah, I'm
So
sorry.
Yeah, so the ARP, I would not put that in because we don't know what that is. That what we're hearing that's going to be used for is for things that could be obviously outside of the budget and for lost revenue from previous budgets. So it's really not appropriate to put it in the general fund at this time.
Okay, so two quick follow-ups to that. One, I look at our current year budget, and we have created a new revenue line called COVID miscellaneous revenue. And the
Right.
amount, so because we have the precedent and because we also realize, well, that's why I mentioned, again, debits and credits, everything should balance. You could either do it off the books, so it's not transparent from a layman's perspective, or we could do it on the books. In this case, we have listed for the current year that we received $885,000 in revenue that was not previously budgeted, and somehow that was dispersed as an expense throughout the general fund. In the similar vein, we know we're going to have anticipated COVID-related expenses in 2022. Chris used the word intimidated. It's intimidating about the uncertainty of what those expenses would be. So now that we have the precedent of recognizing outside.
That's not the reference I used the word intimidating for. The reference was intimidating to the regulations, not the way you phrased it.
Thanks for the clarification, Chris. So we have this precedent of a revenue line that represents outside money that we then used in the general fund and dispersed it to pay for COVID-related expenses. If the ARPA, contains language that you cannot use those funds to offset taxes or to delay taxes or to pay for reoccurring normal operating expenses. COVID's a unique thing, but if ARPA at its current state appears to prevent us from using those funds to pay for general expenses, and since we've acknowledged that the general fund is the destination to put revenues in for COVID-related expenses, should we not then budget for COVID-related expenses to be consistent with how our books were representing it in the current year?
Are you suggesting we budget $20 million to
No.
offset ARP? I'm not sure what.
No,
what the
because
question.
the question is, we know we're going to have COVID-related expenses. This year, we received $885,000 primarily from the state of Connecticut as revenue, and we booked that into the general fund. So the general fund is the source for paying COVID-related expenses, but we've not reflected those expenses in our budget, and we've not reflected any revenue to offset those expenses in the budget. So it seems to be, from a layman's perspective, you're going to have expenses, but you're keeping them out of the budget. You have certain revenue, and I don't mean to babble, but it seems more appropriate that knowing you're going to have an expense that has to be paid by the general fund, that expense should be reflected, and the source of that money, whether it's our property taxes or it's a potential third-party grant, should also reflect how that expense is going to be funded. Or alternatively, we could not be transparent and just kind of bury the whole COVID expense, situation.
Councilman, I see
Yeah.
what the question is you're trying to ask. It's a circular argument because we have a whole bunch of other state grants we receive, which we don't specifically itemize what our expenses for. This money was dedicated to the town of Stratford for our use, our intended use. How would you, I don't want to put it in there, how would you recommend budgeting expenses which haven't been identified for it, for not this grant, but for the Mashantucket Pequot Indian grant, or the I'm just pulling another one, the
Well, Chris,
municipal revenue share.
right. So let's start.
Like,
Exactly. We're a distressed community. We're getting an extra $4.7 million. The state doesn't care how we spend it. We may still be distressed after spending that 4.7, but there's no restrictions on that money. So I'd like to start on the expense side. With reasonable estimation, we know there were going to be incremental costs due to COVID, but the budget is not reflecting those expenses. Therefore, it doesn't have to reflect how those expenses will be paid for. And I believe that the certainty of those expenses should be reflected in the budget, and their funding source, even though we may not know if ARPA could be it, we still need a placeholder to identify how those certain expenses will be funded.
All right, so I'm going to stop you right there, Mr. Cannon. I'm going to let Mayor Hordick address this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dancho. So the governor has postponed when the budgets need to be passed through an executive order so communities can determine, once they receive the grant funding, what they know it can be spent on, can modify their budgets. So we're going through what our existing budget proposal with the understanding that after the regulations from the American Rescue Plan come out, we'll be addressing opportunities for us to utilize that grant funding for areas of importance. And of course, as a legislative body, we approve the budget. You do. So that's when you'll have your chance to talk about it. I think that we're, to Chris Timniak's point, as much as we want to have fully vetted conversation about the budget, we're talking about things we have no idea about, but if we wait 3 weeks, we'll have a better idea. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Just a couple of follow-up questions, and thank you to the mayor. I did be. First question would be, do we anticipate voting on this budget in May, or do we need another month to contemplate it, given the governor's allowance?
Well, Greg, since you're going to be no anyway, what difference does it matter if it's today or it's 6 weeks from now?
I got to write my amendments, Jim.
Oh, good. Okay, good. As long as we
And like I
understand
said, we'll take your amendments seriously. So does anyone else have any comments?
Yeah. Well, Laura, I'll finish. I have just a couple more.
Okay, because
I'm still on.
Mr. Can, we've got a lot of other people that want to speak. So I think you've made your point. So
well, no, there's some points that haven't yet been made. So our excellent.
Had the floor. Let's finish.
Well, I believe the mayor said that we're not restricting our time to, and that we're in favor.
I'm not talking about time, Mr. Can. I'm talking about everyone's ability to be here tonight, and we're going to be respectful for their time. Thank you. So
excellent. Hopefully this discussion is valuable to them. Unanticipated expenses, there's also unrealized revenues. Question to Dawn, our investment income is only 10% of projected, and the miscellaneous revenue is only 10% of projected, yet we're budgeting for the same levels of investment and miscellaneous revenue for 2022. Explain the shortfalls in our projected revenues, and why would we think those impediments would be rectified in 2022?
My response to that is that this year, as you know, the pandemic hit, and the cash flow was a concern. We had the legislation that you passed regarding the TANs that we might have to borrow for tax revenue, and we had the deferral both in July and in January. So, and as you know, the interest rate that was going up the prior year dramatically dropped. So we really did not, the town moved some of its funding into the state STIF account, which is a short-term investment fund that was doing very well. But then, for lack of a better term, kind of tanked when the pandemic hit. So we thought it was more prudent to not really invest the town's money in anything where that wasn't liquid. So we just kept it in the bank account where it was making very little interest. So I anticipate that the rates, now as you know, the markets have improved, rates are increasing. There's some opportunities that we're looking at to make some better investment now that we will have better cash flow going forward, especially when we receive additional federal aid. So, I'm just talking to other finance directors in the GFOA community in Connecticut about, how to maximize that. So I feel more confident that we could do better with our interest income going forward. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I'll have one final question, Laura. Dawn, to workman's comp, you mentioned the internal service fund. If you look at the CAFR, I'm going to make up a number. It shows like a $13 million shortfall or something of that magnitude, and that we're just funding it on some kind of actuarial basis year to year.
Yeah.
If not today, but it's at some point soon, could you explain how it's okay for the workman's comp internal fund to reflect such a huge negative? That's the question.
Oh, yes. And I think you will also have an opportunity to talk to our auditors when they present the audit at a meeting to be determined month. So because we're required by accounting principles to have to post these implicit liabilities, now we have a negative fund, and we handle it really as a pay-as-you-go basis. So just have anticipated expenses for the year, and that's how we budget. I mean, there is no town that I know of that has a fully funded workers' comp or OPEB or any of those other funds where liability is goes out that long. So does that answer? I mean, that's the best I can answer it right now.
Yes, and can the other employee benefits fund, we'll also bring that question up to the auditor. Thank you, Laura. I'm all set.
All right, so thank you, Dawn, and everyone who participated in that. And we're going to move, if no one else has further questions, we're going to move on to page 24, the employee benefits. And
We answered already.
we have Ron back and Dawn.
Yep.
So the employee benefits are estimates based on our obligations, such as Social Security. Again, the health insurance has increased. That is, the town receives. We have consultants, and as mentioned before, that is a self-insured account. So although it's managed by
Brown.
Yeah, well, it's managed by administered by Anthem Blue Cross, our insurance itself. We don't pay per employee. We pay actual expenses, and so this amount that's in the budget is based on an estimate we get from our consultants, and then that fund is moved, that amount is moved in entirety to another fund where the expenses flow through. So that's why the increase is based on an increase that we were given. And a lot of that, Ron, is, you might be able to speak to this as well, is due to that a lot of, they feel that our consultants feel that based on our data and on other trends, that due to COVID, a lot of elective surgeries and other surgeries that were, not critical will be happening in the coming year. And so this number is higher, and as well as just normal inflation of insurance costs. Medical. And the pension contribution is, again, based on our actuaries who look at a number of factors. They look at the pension itself. They look at the number of employees we have. We give them a lot of data that they feed into their formulas and their estimates, and they use some mortality tables that were changed this year to better reflect actual mortality rates, and they figure out what the amount is that we need to put in, the town needs to put into the pension to make sure that we cover our pension obligation going forward. And so this amount is the amount that we were given by the actuaries, and the town needs to fund that in full.
Thank you, John. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ron?
Nope, she addressed all these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like we've got a lot of consultants. Hopefully they're.
Yes.
Is there any questions that anyone has regarding the employee benefits part of the budget?
Dawn, I'll pen my question if anyone else wants to take an opportunity.
Okay, Greg, did you say that you had a question?
Yes, I'll start with the pension contribution. So from a layman's perspective, under debt service, we have a large pension bond obligation, and we have this obligation. Together, they represent our total contribution to funding our pension liabilities on an annualized basis.
No. So, I mean, not exactly. So the town took out, bonded a number of years ago for the pension was not funded in full, as most towns. So which means that the money going out was to pay pensions was a lot more than the money going in. And so this pension contribution is the money that needs to get put in every year, and that amount kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So what happened was the town borrowed money to put into the pension fund that would then fund it more completely, not percent. I believe it was 85%, and then the amount that they have to put in every year wouldn't be as high. And so the bond is separate. That's for paying back the debt that we borrowed. This goes directly into our investments, our pension fund investments, as well as any employees who are still under the pension plan, this defined benefit pension plan. We also take contributions from employees and put into that plan along with this funding. And then, we pay for active pension payments out of the plan during the year. And then any interest or, investment income, dividends that we get here also just stay in the plan to help make those payments as well.
So we can ask the pension bond counsel or the pension fund manager that any income reflected in his report is likely from three sources: the earnings from the investments, the contribution from the employees, and this line item, which is an annual contribution to the town.
Yes.
OPEB will talk to the appropriate person when they're before the council. Going back to health insurance, Ron, it is a difficult thing. Just as an anecdote, the city of Las Vegas, its fire, police, teachers, and all the casino workers are also self-funded. And for 3 years, I managed the health insurance side of that in regards to structuring what coverages, what wellness plans, what hospital and physician contracts could be used to utilize a reduction or to, in a sense, control the cost of health benefits. Do you believe, well, Brown & Brown identified any strategies, for example, out-of-network utilization, that the town of Stratford could utilize in its health insurance contracts that we're not yet taking advantage of?
Well, as you know, Greg, we went to a point of service planning to the HSA, and that was the big move for the town to save money from that perspective. Because again, being self-insured, we're not locked into a certain rate for use of services, so it's kind of a use as Dawn said, pay as you go type of situation. So we have exhausted a lot of the areas. Like I said, the wellness thing is a big portion of where there can be some savings. But again, getting it locked into all the unions is not easy, as you know. And again, our cost for services is, I think, a lot different expense-wise than it is out in Las Vegas and most other areas of the country. The Northeast is known for its high expenses. So the network that we use of doctors, it's the Northeast, and you got to pay the Northeast wages. So sometimes the increase is what the increase is, as Dawn pointed out, just the normal inflation rates that we get from the service provider. So we got to pay the bills that people use the services on. So it's very difficult to say that we can tell them who they can only use, because part of the HSA is that they are putting some of their own monies first. They have a deductible, so they're using their monies first. So it's pretty hard to tell them, well, you got to use these doctors only when they're putting out their own money.
Right.
And for both of you, looking at the monthly list of expenditures, the 9.2 million that we put aside for 2021, the current year, has been totally spent. We still have 3+ months left. That in itself can justify an increase in this line item.
Well, Greg, I want to clarify, like I said before, that it's expensed because we just do a journal entry and we move that into the fund where the expenses actually flow through. So it's expensed in the sense that we made the contribution to the fund where the expenses flow through.
Do we expect the current
So
year?
we're like moving it from one
right.
to another. Yeah, we're moving it from one account to another. Yeah.
So if we thought we'd have to move 9.2, but likely we'll have to move 10.5 through the end of this year, is that why the 2022 budget reflects a 15% increase?
I don't think we're not moving
No,
to 10.5 for this.
Well, let's say
Hold on, John.
it's increased It's increased based on what we need to cover for next year.
Yes. So so it seems that our current year utilization under our current year Anthem benefit package, if you will, we will probably need to move 15 to 20% more this year than we had originally anticipated. And that's due to the higher utilization that needs to be underwritten. Do we anticipate, it may be too early, but will that be compounded by an increase in, for example, administrative costs, which is another factor in the cost of health insurance?
The administrative cost for the services is been locked in already. And that's with
Okay.
Anthem. It's the unknown cost of how much is going to be used that we anticipate July 1 going forward would be reaching up to potentially 10.6 million starting July 1.
Ron, I just wish you and the mayor best of luck in completing these contract negotiations and balancing the need for cost of living increases versus offsetting this, I'll call it an extraordinary inflation in medical costs. It's complicated, and thank you for managing it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question for John or Mr. Ng? Seeing none, we're going to move ahead. Thank you both for your explanations and doing some good budget anticipating. We're going to move ahead to town clerk, which is on page 17, and we have there she is, under Dave Wright.
It's me, Susan, also known as Dave Wright. I have his camera I'm borrowing, so that's that. Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to present our budget to you tonight. I'm sure you have noted there are very few changes. Our budget tends to be fairly consistent year after year. The one increase I do have is in account 6503, which is our elections account. I anticipate that we'll experience an increase in voters requesting absentee ballots this year in consideration that this year is a mayoral election year. And most likely we may have some primaries in September. And with that in mind, we'll definitely have an increase in absentee ballot requests. You know, as an aside, if the governor was to extend his executive order and allow no excused absentee ballot voting, we would track the expenses and seek reimbursement after. My budget does not reflect any COVID expenses. And then at this time, I know Mr. Can had asked a question in general about maybe any budget constraints and if it affects our services here in the town clerk's office. And I have to say, no, not really. The budget has been, I've been here 14 years, so it's pretty much consistent and never really takes a hit one way or another, up or down, you know, just slight increases. And I feel like, you know, we're always able to provide, you know, pretty excellent services for our, you know, for our users and are able to respond to any kind of request that we have promptly. And that's really pretty much it. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'm here.
Thank you, Susan, for that report. Is there anyone that has any questions for the town clerk's office at this time?
This is Greg. No further questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Then I think we're all set with your department, and appreciate you being here tonight.
Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Next on the list is economic development, and I see Mary Dean is on there. Hi, Mary.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. So I'll start with our budget. You'll note that economic development was able to bring their budget down. We increased under dues and subscriptions 6509, but also reduced activities programs because we found that there was so much that we didn't spend on in activities and programs in 2020. So we were able to reduce that, and we increased dues and subscriptions to be able to purchase a software tool, customer relationship management, CRM, in order to provide more efficiency in our office and better service. Our office has spent a significant amount of time exploring tools that could enable us to centralize, update, and provide immediate access to the entire office's business and individual contact information. The CRM software, which was created by economic development folks for economic developers, populates information and links to our Outlook, which we looked into to make sure that it would be compatible. And this allows us to manage relationships by documenting all our interactions and linking all communications, attachments, etc., to the appropriate contacts and businesses. Aside from the obvious benefits, we will be able to organize and streamline our management of each project, whether it be a redevelopment of a brownfield site, a property search for an interested developer, or a Celebrate event. So it'll really bring everything together. Another significant benefit is the ability to conduct analysis and generate meaningful reports. So we're really excited about this tool and didn't want to increase our budget, but so we kind of worked at reducing one so that we could be able to purchase this software. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mary. That sounds great. Is this a software that requires an annual subscription or?
So it will. It's the initial cost is $8,000, and then actually they agreed because we had spent so much time investigating tools. They agreed to charge us the $7,500 because we basically did our own RFQ in terms of looking for tools that we could access. We reached out to other towns. We started with our IT department. So not next year, but the year thereafter, it will be a $1,500 charge per year.
Definitely worth it. Thank you. That's that sounds awesome. Anybody else have any questions for the Mary Dean and the economic development?
This is Greg Can. If I'll give others a chance to ask a question. Okay. 4 seconds. Mary Dean, I tried to be constructively critical and not and think about the process. The process about how we execute this. The software is a great tool for efficiency and quality of the data that's retained. My question is, first question is, what % of time are we spending managing existing projects, for example, center school or contract plating, versus initiating new opportunities and attracting new investors?
I would say that it just all, it's a constant work in our office between the three of us. And, when I'm looking at the Army Engine site, former center school site, contract plating, so we're spending time on these long-time projects. And I know, you sit in and listen to our RDA meetings and our Economic Development Commission meetings, and they are existing projects that will bring new opportunities. So we look at that as twofold. And then while we're also working on that, we look at other aspects such as managing our infrastructure projects, which will then accommodate and attract new business. For example, Route 110, managing that, and then being able to support Sikorsky, and then down the line, Ryder's Landing, which has upcoming projects for development there. Same thing goes with West Broad Street. We support those infrastructure projects, Honey Spot Road, Stratford Avenue, in that whole West Broad area, Ross and Ross. So we have various Hudson Paper Company that's on the market. So we're looking at supporting business new opportunities through our infrastructure, and then constantly working on our relationships and building with commercial realtors and industry experts, having knowledge of our property inventory that's available. Working with planning and zoning and working on any revisions and discussions that can attract businesses. And then, looking at opportunities, and there have been a few on town-owned properties that could be sold and developed. So it's just a constant, it's hard to say a percentage because within one day you're working on one and then you're working on another. It's just, it flows in our office wherever it's needed.
Is there, it's a lot of activity to manage. Does that result in a constraint on your resources where we can't do everything that we want to do today? Is there anything that town council can do budget-wise to help your team be more efficient at delivering and realizing some of these opportunities?
I feel like our and you I know you already know this, Greg, because you're aware of what we're doing with our Economic Development Commission. They've really risen to the occasion and have budgeted for all of our marketing. They've really, so that has lessened it's enabled us to say, okay, we can put this towards a CRM tool and learn this and figure out how best to get reports in. If you ask a question, we don't have to, it will be easier to be able to supply information and keep track of what's happening in our town, economic development, in our office. So I feel like, and then Celebrate is another area that, we were able to slightly reduce the activities programs because of the support of businesses in town that have been able to, contribute to Celebrate, partner with us so that we could have these community events. So I do appreciate the offer and the interest, but I think that right now with, the help from various, business commissions, RDA, and our business partners, that we're making it all work.
And one last question. Congratulations on the recent video. I forget its title, one that promoted the community. Mm-hmm. And as an adjunct to that, I've used this phrase, strategic marketing plan, meaning a method to increase our visibility with national investors, national developers, so that when we do an RFP, for example, we get a higher quality response and more. Do we have anything in the works regarding a video, for example, that would increase our exposure with people that may not be familiar with Stratford?
So we did our business community, our business video back, I'm trying to remember when that was. I think what happened was we were going to start it, COVID hit, and then we said, let's do a restaurant, support the restaurant. And then we did do a business video, and we have had a lot of feedback as you know, from RDA, and from, RD and from Economic Development Commission, people with marketing experience as to where we should make sure we get these videos out. The supportive ones we did during COVID that were for our, barbershops, restaurants, all the different types of businesses. And we have really made inroads with brownfield experts when we went to the brownfield conference in December of 2019. And we've been working with experts in the brownfield properties that are from Colorado, that are from California. And we're developing these relationships so that when we go out for an RFP, we can make it go far and wide. And it also counts with developing relationships and working with DECD up at the state and just multiple different DEEP, EPA. It's constantly communicating and developing relationships so that these different entities know what we're doing and can help support us. We hope to have the center school RFP out at the end of the month. And I've got almost a dozen developers that have said, please make sure you send it to me. We're getting phone calls. They're here and they're from all over. They're just hearing about it. So it's never, we never settle for it, but we just always have to look at how we market the town and how widespread we can go.
Thank you, Mary.
All set.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to recognize Councilor Pia.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, Mary. Good evening. Just want to give you perspective. So from my side, being involved with the chamber and the business community in town, excuse me, for as long as I have in the nature and scope of my business, the word is out, as you kind of said it. So I'm not surprised you're getting calls. I deal with a lot of commercial real estate brokers, and the word is out about the town. And I do want to thank you. And you walk into the economic development office in town hall, and it's like a warming feel between the three of you ladies there, and you really do put your heart into it, and it shows. So thank you. And I want to know that the work you guys are doing is showing. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else that has a question for Mary Dean regarding economic development?
Laura, Bill O'Brien.
Mr. O'Brien.
Hey, Mary. Also not mentioned is the great development at the former mobile chemical plant, and great job bringing Athletic Brewing in with a big addition to their business, and they're going to hire a lot of employees, I guess. But is your head count now actually 3 rather than 2.5?
Oh, it's 3. There's 3 of us. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
we're the
mistake.
Yeah. There's
Okay.
all of us.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. So Dawn will take care of that edit. And if there's any other questions for Mary,
Yes.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Mary, for your presentation, and we look forward to sharing all those videos as well.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to start for planning and zoning and then let Jay chip in.
Okay, so if we're done with economic development, we'll move on to planning and zoning, and Mary, you have the floor.
So the planning and zoning and buildings made it very easy for us this year. Planning and zoning was able to reduce their budget slightly. They had a software program. It's almost like our CRM that we're getting this year, that we, the initial cost. And so they were able to reduce their budget. I did want to address one of the questions that Councilperson Pan had regarding the plan of conservation and development being funded. Jay requested that $75,000 be taken from CIP for 2 years, which would fund the plan of conservation development. We don't need to have the money, the total amount, the first year, since it's a long-term plan.
Okay, thank you. Jay, do you have anything you want to add?
No, that pretty much covers it for me, unless anybody has any questions. Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll open it up to questions from the counselors. Anybody have a question for planning and zoning?
I can, but I'll let others go first if they like.
No, Mr. Can, you have the floor.
So the POCD, well, it's a 2-year project. It'll be, which CIP, we have short-term and long-term. So we're bond principal budgeted 17 reflect this $75,000 cost. If Don's not on, we can pend it for their answer.
Dawn, can you answer?
I'm
that
sorry,
question?
I missed that.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry.
Don, does our debt service fund include the funding for the POCD?
Well, I believe Mary, are you referring to a plan, the plan going forward?
Yes.
So that plan has not been presented yet, Counselor Khan?
So it's possible we may need to add 75,000 in principal to our short-term bonding debt service allocation.
Well, the plan has not been presented to the council, so we haven't done anything yet.
Okay, so at this point, it seems that our debt service fund is not yet funding the CIP expense related to the future PD. Which is typically, yeah, I mean, if Don's not certain, she can answer.
I'd have to review the plan last year.
Yeah, again, I just want to assure that our expenses, reflect our work in progress. All right, Don, you can answer that as soon as you have an opportunity. Back to planning and zoning. The zoning and planning department last year itemized a number of opportunities that we were not yet funding. Those opportunities are still not funded, but they were often defined as critical need or new opportunities to improve revenues. We also have projects that housing partnerships recommendations. They suggested changes that we could use to satisfy affordable housing and quote unquote keep the state off our back. As listed in my submitted questions, I just want to see, why are we not funding a project planning position that can help coordinate all the initiatives? Why not funding the incremental cost of our anticipated zoning changes? We're also apparently not funding projects related to future partnerships or desired partnerships with state and federal agencies or private entities that would help us realize development opportunities, whether it's flood mitigation or workforce housing, et cetera. So my focus is on how do we facilitate leaping forward in a manner that makes us more competitive with neighboring communities, and funding some of these positions seem to provide appropriate ROI regarding their impact on tax revenues and housing, et cetera.
Well, you're talking about hiring people. You want to increase the number of personnel that are currently in zoning or economic development on,
Laura, that I am repeating the suggestion that were listed
I'm
by
sorry,
the admin.
you're being cut out.
Council, and I would say as the CAO, I mean, a lot of the things you just rattled off are going to be opportunities are going to present themselves through grant funding, through collaborative work relationships, whether it's with MetroCog or another agency which comes on top of it to help implement these programs. As these opportunities come up, we'll certainly vet them and definitely keep the council aware of how we're going to structurally handle the new workload coming in. And as you led off with the question about me about planning for the future, the last thing I want to do is book positions right now, which I don't know when the implementation part is going to process. So I think that would be disingenuous to the taxpayer to preemptively hire and to fully fund medical benefits, the whole bit for projects which we don't have a set start date on.
So I would also like to add that, and Jay, you can speak to this, but I know that the office is very good about efficiently planning ahead. So they are very aware that the plan of conservation and development will begin next year over a long-term period. It will not just be their office. Their office will be heading it, but it will be the participation of all the town departments. And Jay has indicated, and Jay, you can comment on this, please, that they have looked at, okay, now we're past this, we're going to go to the next. And they've done a timeline and they figured out how they can best dedicate time to the projects that are priority.
And
Yeah,
that makes
thanks, Mary. This is
sense.
Jay Habib. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead, Mr. Urbanski.
So, yeah, Jay Habansky here. Just to add on briefly what Mary had said, I spend a considerable amount of my time sequencing our projects. We've got, as we've been discussing here, the POCD is a 2-year project. We got the zoning rewrite, large scale project, and then we have all of our other projects that we're working on kind of concurrently with those, and we have those manageably sequenced so that our current staffing can manage those projects effectively and efficiently. And as much as I would love to add some more staff and more help, I'm not sure that this is the year. I think this is the year of project management. These next 2 years, once we get through these big hurdles where myself and upper level staff are able to kind of manage some of these large scale projects, some additional help would be tremendous during our implementation phases. So.
Thank you, Jay. So Laura, to your point about adding new personnel, it was a suggestion by the administration, not my suggestion.
I was just trying to clarify what you were asking for. So I think that it's been addressed by both Mary and Mr. Habansky. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you for letting me clarify. The next point is many of us who have managed large scale projects with constrained resources, we understand trade-offs are necessary. The concept of doing things sequentially versus doing things in parallel. And the opportunities that were listed in previous budgets and the opportunities that I mentioned, they're not future opportunities. They are current and past opportunities that we have not been able to participate in. So I'd say it's disingenuous, to Mr. Timiak's point, that we have an opportunity to fast track a project or to apply for a grant. And if our existing resources need to sequentially do that work, and therefore we do not realize that opportunity, therefore we are not pursuing all of the competitive opportunities that have been in front of us, meaning that because of the constraint on our resources, we are delaying certain tasks which could expedite the realization of economic growth and recreating the Stratford of tomorrow. So, I'm kind of back to the point that we asked Mary and other departments. Since we have a constraint on resources, and since we're talking about current projects and current funding opportunities, not future ones, why would we delay the realization and let other municipalities pursue those and acquire those? We don't have the resources to take advantage of it.
So, Mr.
Greg,
Ken, you're implying that we are not, we're missing out on opportunities because you're saying we don't have the staff or the time in order to pursue them. So I don't know if you have an example of what it is you're talking about, but I'm sure that both Mary Dean and Jay Kapansky can respond to that question.
Yeah, so I'll start and then I'll let Jay tag along. I mean, in conjunction with so many other projects they're working on, their office, Planning and Zoning, has developed a statewide and even far-reaching reputation on what they've done with CRM and with flood mitigation, with moving on to the next phase of the Greenway, with the Complete Streets project. They are just going dynamo. So I'm just trying to figure out where, they've gotten grants. I'm just trying to figure out where they're lagging behind for the town of Stratford, because I know there've been multiple press releases on all the initiatives that have come through out of that office, saving residents for flood insurance, because we've been able to improve our rankings because of the work that's been done. So, Jay, you can add to that, but I'm just confused as to what area that Planning and Zoning is lagging in.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you have an example of what it is you're trying to describe to us.
Yes, I could refer everyone to the 2021 proposed budget. It contained about 12 different examples in its footnotes on the Planning and Zoning page in particular. I'll use one example. Because we couldn't get a quorum, our housing partnership didn't meet. Now that they have met and they have itemized a list of potential zoning interventions, other towns have already implemented many of those interventions. So it's good that and I'm trying to be very constructive here, that if other towns have the resources to execute a plan, but we are constrained and therefore we have to approach these sequentially, we may have successes, and we have had successes. So I'm not minimizing the successes, like the FEMA grant for flood mitigation and the reduced insurance costs for all those homeowners. Not minimizing that at all, but saying that the administration has documented other projects that we are not yet able to execute because our resources do not enable us to execute. So the evidence is in the budget. The evidence is in the projects that have either not been initiated or have been reported on, but not yet, completed. Laura, do I need to list other examples, or is?
No, Mr. Can, and if you don't mind, you could say Councilwoman Dancho so that you don't get me confused with other Lauras that are on this phone call. So I'm going to let Mr. Timniak
I would just say, Councilman Can, I mean, you're citing an example which can be done with, everything from, you see litter on the street, we need to hire more people to pick up the trash. There's always something which can be done, and obviously you've highlighted and you're creating a narrative that the zoning department can't handle what they're anticipating doing. And I don't think it's a fair narrative to cast upon this department or any other department. I mean, clearly, if you're talking about adding new employees or extra employees for everything from, like cited the garbage to, extra police, extra firefighters. I mean, when you create a scenario which more can get done with more people, it's the opportunities are limitless. And when you compare us to other towns, which specific towns are you comparing us to? Are you referring to Greenwich or referring to Milford? Are you referring to Seymour or Ansonia? Like it's a never-ending circle, and it comes faced with the reality of, what the taxpayers are willing to provide and what projects we can handle in a timely manner. And right now, I'm confident that the zoning department can handle what's out in front of them based upon my previous answer of what we anticipate getting done. And I would leave it there.
I agree.
And
Thank you.
I would just like to clarify that they do a tremendous amount of work in parallel. So that is, I mean, the housing partnership started a year ago and wrapped up, and it's going to be sitting in front of the council on May 10th. And that was, that was led by the mayor and the planning and zoning committee partnership. So, and out of planning. So I just like to say, I think they do a wonderful job of multitasking and getting things done and giving Stratford a really good reputation up in Hartford and elsewhere.
Exactly. Thank you, Mary, for that.
All right.
Are there other counselors that have any questions for?
Sorry, Laura. Will you come? I mean, I'm not being.
Mr. Kim,
Greg, you've talked for 30 minutes. We got the point. Okay.
We understand
Let's move on.
We understand what you're saying.
Well,
We've answered the questions.
There's unnecessary defensiveness.
Nobody's being defensive.
Not defensiveness, Greg. Greg, you're talking over and over and over again. We got the point. Time to move on.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do right now. So thank you, Mary, for that, and Mr. Hibansky. And
we're cutting off discussion. We're
Mr.
cutting off.
I think
yes,
that
Greg, we're shutting you up after 30 minutes. 30 minutes you've been talking.
Well, people keep saying they don't understand what I'm talking about, and I keep pointing back to the budget book or pointing back to our prior specific examples.
And I mean,
if I'm using my time to explain the paper,
I'm going to ask you to mute Mr. Can, if you can, for 1 minute, so that we can move on with this discussion.
Discussion.
Himself. All right, we're going to. Mr. Tavares, do you have a question to address to Mary Dean?
Yeah, well, no, I have a question about the decorum. I think this.
No, we're not going to talk about that now. The decorum is fine.
He deserves a chance to answer his question.
Mr. Tavares, everyone has had an ample time to speak, and I'm asking you, if you have a question for Mary Dean, you can have the floor, but I will not sit here and listen to you reprimand me as chair of this meeting. So if you don't have anything to add to this conversation, I'm going to ask that you mute yourself, and we are going to move on to building inspections. Do you understand me?
I don't like the way you're speaking to me.
I don't like how you're speaking to me.
Just say that.
Okay, so we
have. I'm just saying there should be some decorum here, and there's a lack of it.
There is decorum. So now we're going to move on to building inspection for those of you who would like to participate in a professional meeting. The rest of you who don't, you can just mute yourself and listen. So we're going to move on to building inspection. That's on page 40 for those that are following along in the book. And we're going to stop the name calling and we're going to start calling everyone by their respectful names. And no one is going to interject while I am speaking as chair of this committee. Is that clear? Thank you.
Point of
Now,
order.
page 40, please.
Point of order.
No point of order. We're moving on.
Point of order for
No
the
point-
attorney.
There's no attorney here. This is a
There is.
workshop. This
It's
is
Robert's rule. Point of order.
It's not a formal meeting.
Robert's. It's not a formal meeting.
And now
It's
we're
not
going to move forward.
Meeting is a
Everyone
publicly. Point
Margot,
of order. If a councilman has the floor, who is entitled to interrupt that councilman?
I am.
Point of order.
Are
We're
you
speaking
done?
about professional decorum.
It was professional up until about 5 minutes ago, Mr. Can.
Point of
Building-
order, question for the attorney. Who has the opportunity to interrupt the person who has the floor, and under what circumstance?
Apparently you think you do, so we're done with you.
Laura,
Madam
you
Chair,
say you
Madam-
have the
there's no
floor,
attorney
but
on the
you
call.
interrupt me. If
There's
you're
no
interrupting me, my question to the attorney is, what circumstance enables you to interrupt me and then declare that I'm interrupting you?
Nobody interrupted you, Mr. Can. You asked your questions and we had a discussion with all of your questions that you provided ahead of time as asked. So now we're going to move forward because I don't think that there's anything more that is needed to be added to the former discussion. So we're going to move forward. And that's what we're going to do now on page 40 is building inspection. Thank you.
So I will start with building inspection and have have Brian Donovan add to anything. Again, across the board, they reduced their budget by 2% and, have been doing a wonderful job through COVID. And now as our world is getting more normalized with permitting and, any extra comments Brian has or any questions, be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mary, for that. If anyone has a question regarding buildings inspections, please indicate that. Mr. Pia.
Thank you. Brian, good evening. Question for you. I know, is your audio good?
I'm good.
Okay. Hi, Brian. Just to reiterate, I know each year we've talked about more and more how the digital transformation your offices continue to make. From the client side, people are very happy with how you guys operate in town from a building department, building inspection department. That's a kudos. What else can you see? How can we continue to evolve and where are we going with that? Because it's the new realm. I don't have to tell you, you understand exactly how to run your department, but where else are we going? Because I'm just optimistic about it.
The good thing is everything's online and we go back more than 9 years online. And as you know, there was a state statute passed 3-4 years ago that anything with residential over 9 years old is deemed closed by state statute. So a couple years ago, I did want to put all my stuff online and have it all scanned, but it's only the commercial stuff that is older than 9 years. So most title searchers have access through our permit software very easily to see if everything's closed within 9 years. If it's older than 9 years, it's deemed closed by state statute. So it's only the commercial stuff that's older than 9 years that I would need to get scanned, and I just don't see it being cost effective to do that based on the number of inquiries we have. It's a manageable task that we do.
Thank you. Is there anybody that has any questions for the building department, building inspection?
Greg Can.
Mr. Can, you have the floor.
The number of applications this year went up, maybe due to COVID, maybe due to economic development, but thank you for finding ways to make that process accurate and efficient within your existing budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that has?
It was due to COVID and more people doing work, and it was also easy to do through the online permitting.
Awesome.
Anyone else have a question for Mr. Donovan? So hearing none, we're going to move on. Thank you for being with us this evening. Thank you, Mary, for your contributions. So we're going to move on to the library next.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you all for your hard work on the budget in the process, and thank you for the time to discuss the library's budget request. Our experience this year has been unlike any other. I know you can all say that. Our library workers have raised to the challenges time and time again. The Stratford Library was among one of the first libraries in Connecticut to offer curbside service last spring. And recognizing the needs of job seekers and of those people in our community who do not have internet access at home, we opened our doors to the public in July just for computer users. And then within a few weeks, we were able to open the entire building for browsing and borrowing. Remote programming has been a huge part of our services this year, and our staff established our very first online program just 4 days after we had to close the library building to the public last spring. Right now, we are in the planning phases for summer programs, and while we continue some of our virtual programs over the summer, we will also be utilizing outdoor spaces in order to safely bring people together in the warmer weather. It's been our goal to remain not a super spreader site for Stratford, and so far we've been able to maintain that level of safety. Our workforce continues to line up for vaccinations, and we're making plans to reestablish full library hours, and our budget request is based on full library hours for the fiscal year starting July 1st. The library budget this year reflects increases in payroll, contract maintenance, building insurance, and supplies. Many of the town departments don't have some of these budget items in their budget, so that's why you see a little bit more fluctuation when it comes to the library. The remaining items in our budget have been held flat or have been reduced. So the mayor's proposed budget for the library reflects a 2.5% increase over last year. This proposal reflects a $55,153 or 1.65 reduction in the budget that was requested by the library board for fiscal year 22. You may recall that the approved budget for this current fiscal year reflected a $125,000 reduction in the library's request for the budget last year at this time. Last spring, the library thankfully qualified for a payroll protection program grant. It was a loan, it has been forgiven, it is now a grant. And we were able to use that grant funding to bridge this $125,000 gap. We also used a portion of those funds to save some money in fiscal year 20. We used $76,000, almost $77,000 of that funding to bridge, to basically save money at the end of last year as well. In this current fiscal year, as I said, we used a portion of the funding to bridge that $125,000 gap, and then the remaining funding was used to cover payroll expenses over the summer, and we are anticipating an 8% savings in our overall approved budget for fiscal year 21, just on the PPP loan. So we're very grateful about that. And we're grateful for an increase as well, but the library budget, as the mayor has proposed it, will have a negative impact on library service in the coming year. Unlike last year, we will not be eligible for a second round of PPP grant funding. The library board took time to really research this. Our income was too high for, we didn't lose enough money last year. We obtained grant funding. We were very grateful for that, but we also know that took away the PPP option for year 2. In order to make up the difference in the funding that's lost, the $55,000, we will see a loss in Sunday hours, which reduces access to computers for patrons who do not have this equipment at home. We also know losing Sundays means we miss out on a lot of working families who can only come in on Sundays. We'll also see a decrease in some programming and events, both in person and virtual. And we'll also see a decrease in materials, books, periodicals, that sort of thing. For 2021, there was a question from Councilman Can about how much of our current year budget we have accessed. At this point, he's stating yes, with the budget cycle 75% complete. At the time that he was looking at the records, we'd only spent or accessed 58% of our budget. And that is due in part to just there was something that hit the books right after that point, because when I looked at the number, we were over 60%. But also to the PPP savings is already being reflected in money that we have not requested from the town. So those are my comments about the budget, and I'm prepared for any questions.
Thank you, Sherry, for that. And we also have Jerry Diorio on for questions as well. So your budget, I'll start off, I suppose. Your budget is increasing by 2.25%, and you're saying that you're going to have to close on Sundays. Did you consider maybe closing on a Monday or another day, or is there some other way that can be offset to allow the weekend time to still be open for people that can only come in on a Saturday or Sunday?
That's a very good question. We have three types of employees in our workforce. We have our regular full-timers, our regular part-timers, and then we have our Sunday subs. So making reductions in hours on the weekdays creates other issues with the union that we don't have to face when we are dealing with our Sunday substitutes.
Does anyone else have any questions for Sherry or the library staff?
I do.
Ms. Shake.
Thank you so much. Good evening to Sherry and Jerry. It's funny to say it out loud. Thank you for being patient and being with us. I just want to first make a comment, and then I'll ask my questions to whoever would like to answer it. Essentially a year ago when we were having some type of a budget workshop and the library funding had come up right in the middle of COVID, I just want to give an opportunity to say thank you for all the services that the library has offered and has continued to offer, and the ability of your department and the workers that are in our library to be, for lack of a better word, able to adapt and to evolve in how you're going to be delivering your services to our residents. I can't tell you how many emails I had received or messages in whatever form, just of families saying thank you or referring to the information that the library was able to put out, mostly over social media, right? Because we're all in these little like Zoom boxes now. So that's number one. Number two, I recognize, that your board and with the management within the library of trying to create opportunities for our families who don't have access, right, to computers, and being cognizant of the fact that as safely as possible as you could, you did open, and relatively speaking, when compared to some of our surrounding municipalities, they had not ventured in that direction yet. But kudos and thank you for taking all safety measures possible. And I know that there were a number of staff members who, with COVID, like so many of our residents here, did get sick, and I'm thankful that we've been able to get through that. That being said, I am floored by the increase of percentage of online needs that you all and your staff have been able to still supply to many of our residents here. And as a thank you, I would like to see that funding go back into the budget. That would be my request, so that we don't have to lose on services available for all of our residents. I think in the volume of activity as you provided to us, the council, there's a dire need in our town from our residents, and whether it's looking for a job or having to, how many of us have lost jobs, how many of our residents lost employment and had to figure out through training services, which were offered online through your portals, right, how they could then re-equip themselves to be ready to come back into the workforce. So the educational needs, the mental health needs that the library has provided for families, individuals, and even our seniors here were literally life-saving. In addition to, our senior services department, which has worked around the clock. So, my concern, which was a similar concern almost a year ago, was in reducing funding for one of the, in my opinion, one of the most vital functions of our entire town. Just seems like it would lead to a larger disservice here for our residents. And if we can figure out a way to have that $55,000 come back into your budget, so that you're not put in a position to close on Sundays. And to your point, so many of our residents, they're not off unless it's a Saturday, Sunday for many of them. So I would just, I'd like us to figure out how we can fund you in the totality of what it was that you requested, and especially considering the year before, the $125,000 reduction, which I was not in favor of last year either. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Shake, for that. And I'm going to recognize Councilor Pia.
Thank you, Ms. Stancho. Sherry, good evening. How are you?
Good, Chris.
One of the things I did notice, in the highlights there, that 84% increase in the downloadable book service. I mean, listen, that number follows the trend of the world, so it makes complete sense to me. I think everyone on this call would agree that the way the world is trending is towards that. And yes, while I do 100% believe there'll be more than 11,000 items taken out this coming year, I'm just curious if your board had an internal discussion. While maybe it's not going to be 84% of downloadable content, in the next year, does the board feel it's going to be 40%, 50%, 60%? Because I got to believe it's not going to shoot down to 10% again, because people have just become accustomed to the new reality. I'm just curious if you can comment on that.
Sure. Our usage trends have slipped since last spring. I think, more people are, accessing materials in person. So the downloadable spike was definitely in response to being stuck at home back in March, April, May, June. The flat line, it hasn't flatlined, but it's leveled off at a new plateau. I just off the top of my head, and I'm terrible giving numbers and percentages off the top of my head, it's about 40% higher than it was last year, the last time I looked, even at this point. So the trend is definitely up.
I agree.
Yeah.
So you would agree the trend is moving that way, which in society, so that makes sense to me. I'm just curious if you guys had a conversation on it. Do you guys, regarding your board's budget, do you guys have an itemized budget you could provide to the council?
Yes.
Awesome. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. And then, one of the only, you guys too, I know just based off of this, the 90%, excuse me, yes, 90%, more than 90% of the library operations are funded from town appropriation general fund. That other 10%, I'm assuming that's made from fundraisers, donations. I know you guys do have an endowment, correct me if the language if I'm wrong. Is that an accurate? Okay.
That is accurate, and also grant funding.
And
when
grant
we
funding.
can get them. When we can get grants, we get them.
Trust me, all of us like grants, 100%. Do you know approximately how much is in the endowment, and what's the usage of the endowment? What's the trustee language? I was just to educate me.
I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is that something you can look into and get to me?
I would have to refer that back to my endowment committee.
Okay. Thank you. I think that was the only questions I had. Thank you, Ms. Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Pia. Is there anyone else that has questions? Mr. O'Brien, did you?
Yes, thanks, Laura. Hi, Sherry.
Hi,
And
Bill.
Robin and Jerry. Do you project a surplus possibly for 2021?
We are looking at the current budget year of at least having, I wouldn't call it a surplus because we don't get the money. We request funding from the town over the course of the year. So we are looking at least 8% of savings in our budget that we would not be requesting from the town.
Okay, and then do you, I should know this, but do you pay for utilities or does the town?
The utilities are part of our budget. We have a line item for that.
Okay, and then I just wondered, how has the capital improvements gone, and do you know how much the town supplied in CIP funds for that?
For nothing to do with utilities, but our capital improvement programs this year, we currently have just finished up with the children's department renovation. We're still getting furnishings for that, but we've expended the capital funding from the town side. That was about $333,000. We do have some requests in for this year for architectural services, for phase 3 of our HVAC replacement. That's been an ongoing project for a number of years, and also for carpeting, flooring, I should say.
I remember you showed me, I think last year, that area that's so popular that is very small. What do you call that? The
teen area, or the we might have been talking about the teen space, or actually I think we were talking about the maker space, the You Create space.
Yeah. So
very
that
small.
we would like to expand that, but is there room to expand it?
That we really would have to sacrifice something else in order to make that larger. And what we've been doing with You Create is we've been using outdoor spaces this year, but also using our larger program rooms and moving things around the building so that we could use other meeting spaces to utilize the equipment that's in there.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. I agree that the library is a great resource and a positive for the town. Is there anyone else that has any questions for either Jerry or Sherry on the library? Thank you both for being here.
Greg Can, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't wait the full 4 seconds. I got Mr. Can going.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Going to make a point, whether it's Sterling House, the library, they have to account for their PPE expenses within their existing budget. It becomes a line item that they anticipate and they plan for. And I want to contrast with our earlier discussion that the town is not yet recognizing in this proposed budget any expenses for PPE, that the unanticipated account is omitting that because we're planning or hoping that we can use ARPA monies, even though the ARP monies have restrictions that you cannot use them to defer, well, to create a tax decrease or to defer a tax. Anyway, I just wanted to recognize that dichotomy. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone else, if anyone else here would like to address the library, let me know. 1001, 1002, 1003. We're good. Thank you both for being here, and we're excited to support the library again this year.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody. Next on the agenda is agencies. We're going to move to page 19.
Okay. Agencies.
Yes, page
Yeah,
19.
Yeah. So agencies do a crucial work for the town. I mean, you can look at the list and go down them and recognize every one of them and can think of or name a person on one of those agencies, which does play an important role for the town. We had a slight increase this year of $3,000, and that was for the South End Community Center. Everything else remains status quo. I mean, this is the year most of these agencies need the money. and we're happy to support them. Are there any individual agencies you want me to talk about, or are we happy just to move on?
I'll ask, put it out to the counselors. Is there any specific agency that you would like to have a question to Mr. Timniak on?
Greg Can will refer the councilwoman to the submitted questions, which maybe Mr. Timniak, due to his vacation, has not had a chance to review yet.
I believe that he's back and he has the questions. So Mr. Timniak, would you like to take that?
Yes. Okay. Okay, so the first one, focus on strategic development, ability of agency to impact community improvement. That's a statement, or is that what the first one, focus on, is that, you want me to focus on that?
Listed as a question.
All right, let's park that first one. And in general, looking at all these agencies, they exist so that we can maintain current operations and hopefully create improvements in the level of services, optimize their ability to add value to the town of Stratford. So I've mentioned a couple of them here, which you can speak to.
I did ask Mary Dean to stay on the call to discuss the economic development and the Stratford redevelopment. And I'm happy to defer to her to those. I can speak about the Army engine plant and how that money is used. And I can also talk about CCM. Mary Dean can talk about MetroCog. And I believe the Bridgeport Transit Authority spoke last week.
They did.
At the last meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, do you want to discuss economic development for Councilman Can?
Sure. So I know, Greg, you're probably more aware than a lot of folks as to what the redevelopment agency and the Economic Development Commission do. I referred to the Economic Development Commission earlier, so I'll concentrate on the RDA. And a couple of years ago, you increased the budget for RDA. I believe the town council did, and we have really appreciated that, and it has come in handy in terms of, when there's a foreclosure. I'll give an example like 11 Old South Avenue, where, it's completely, tires all over it. We need to have some assessment done because there's oil cans on it. The RDA, besides, we've also applied for grants to remove or gotten free cleanup, but the RDA has been essential in preparing these foreclosed properties so that we can then put them on the for sale, so they can become tax revenue. So we have not run out of money on the redevelopment agency side. I think it's been a fair amount that's been given to us by the council. So if you have a particular question, because I know you're well versed in what we do, you can, I'd be happy to answer.
Yeah, Mary, we talk about constraints on existing resources, and not to read too much into it, but sometimes during discussion, the RDA will be concerned that it doesn't have funds to intervene certain opportunities because, it has a budget that it has to work within. So if the RDA believed that more money would enable it to expedite solutions rather than looking for alternative sources of funding, I would be in support of that.
I really appreciate that. I'm not thinking of any circumstances where we would need alternate funding with any of the, properties that we've been working on. At this juncture, I think that, I feel comfortable with what the town with the new, the new budget that the town gave to the agency. I think it was back, I can't even keep track, maybe a couple of years ago, they upped it. So, and we also appreciate that it doesn't run out. So in other words, we don't have to say, oh, we didn't use this much well, but we've got these couple of pieces of property we know we're going to need to make improvements on, and we can just kind of segue into the next budget period with that. So that's appreciated as well.
Can I use one example? Let's say Kramer's Garage. It's been, not to exaggerate, but possibly at least 2 years longer that the towns, had some responsibility over that property, and the tires have been an obstacle to mediating the property. We may have a current solution for that, but if we had funds to get those tires off the property, we could have returned the property to the tax, sold it, if you will, sooner rather than wait, looking for the last 2 years to get some alternative source to help us prepare the property. That would maybe a good example of if $8,000 is an impediment to returning a commercial property to the tax rolls. That's an example of what I'm alluding to.
So in the example of the tires, they can afford to pay it, but they had an issue with the town expending the money when, let's just put it out on the market with the tires and let whoever is developing it remove the tires. Now, some of the other issues with that property were also, we did go to EPA, and we could have tried to see, can we spend the money? But EPA gave us a grant to both assess and then remediate the property. And that's, we want to take advantage of that. So, that was a little bit of a delay. But as far as the tires go, I think it was more of a mindset of the RDA that they didn't want the town to have to pay for it. But they certainly could have, there was a money in the budget to remove those tires if they so chose.
Yeah, it's just a question of ROI and realizing opportunities at an earlier state versus, but thank you for answering the question.
You're welcome.
There were some other agencies that we were going to speak of.
So if you don't mind, I'll just go right into MetroCog because I think that was on there, and they have been a significant resource for our office. When you talked about being able to, have the bandwidth to do some of these projects, they've really helped out when we did the community outreach on the Shakespeare property. They were a significant help with us, assimilating all the information because there were so many residents that responded to our meetings. They are currently helping us draft the RFP for the former Center School site that we hope to go out in another couple of weeks. So those are just some examples. They've been a real resource for us, Patrick and Matt and the rest of their group. And I know they've also been a resource for planning and zoning, although, Jay is not on here now.
And the CCM Council of Municipalities, they provide the same synergistic functions to help us get things done sooner.
The CCM does do that. They also help us keep us up to date on legislative issues, breaking trends. It keeps us informed with salary charts for other municipalities. It keeps us up to date on different ordinances or regulations that other towns are doing. It's a great think tank for all of our department heads because through CCM organization, Renee can reach out to another public works director, whether it's Torrington, Danbury, Kent, whatever, and say, hey, you're experiencing this issue. It keeps us connected, and they've kept the cost to be a member of CCM stable for several years now, and I anticipate them to continue to do that. The Bridgeport Transit Authority, they did reduce a bus route. They came and they met with us. They let us know they were analyzing it. The bus route was reduced because nobody was riding it anymore. The ridership was not worth them continuing to do. They did show us areas where there was increased ridership in town, and they planned on having more buses run those routes because of the increased ridership. I don't know if you got into that. And then the Stratford Army Engine Plant, and also I would say Raymark, about 5 years ago when I first started, when those two line items went into the budget. They went into the budget for the purpose of showing that the town is vested in these projects. Having a set line item in the budget shows that we're committed to moving this forward. It helps us with federal agencies. If an expense comes up, which we want to help support the developers of the property, we have a line item to do that. The Raymark one is a better example because Andrea's utilized that several years to help support her get messaging out. Stratford Army Engine Plant, there's a lot going on right now. I anticipate there being a lot of communications, which we're going to want to help utilize that. It's $5,000, which is more of a marker in the budget than anything else. And certainly if I have an expense related to the Stratford Army Engine Plant, I have a line to pull it from. I felt like the symbolism was better than just having it sit in, an unanticipated expense account. At least now we can turn around and we can say when applying for a grant that we have had this in our budget for 5 years, and it's something the town is committed to.
Thank you, Chris. A question. Devil's advocate. Let's speak to the Army Engine Plant. It was at some point about 2 years ago where it was announced that the Army Corps of Engineers and the state DEP had reached an agreement on technically how the mud flats would be remediated. And COVID may have been a barrier, but there's been a lot of barriers dealing with the state and federal agencies. The letter of agreement may have been signed and now they can go to RFP, but it seems like if we have to wait 2 years for every small step, a project life cycle, would more town money for, let's say, lobbying, for someone to go down to Washington and, so to speak, kick some ass, would that be an investment that could get this project expedited, break through the bureaucratic inertia?
Well, I mean, just to play devil's advocate on your devil's advocate, you're basically highlighting that Rosa DeLauro, Senator Murphy, Senator Blumenthal aren't doing their jobs advocating for the Stratford Army Engine Plant, which they are well aware of. Every one of them has done a press conference there and sent out letters. Every one of them has said it's a priority to get done. If you want us to hire a lobby group in Washington, D.C. to do the job of our representatives, I think that's counterintuitive to the taxpayers right now. I don't anticipate it moving any faster. If you want me to echo the frustration of this project not moving forward at the speed we would all like to see it, I'm happy to do so. I don't think hiring a law firm to help push offices which we have direct lines of communication to will be beneficial, and I also think it would highlight failures at the next level of government.
Well, I'd say probably local. I mean, our legislatures are being lobbied from many different directions, right? So for us to lobby them in the sense that goes beyond our normal level of communication would increase the pressure. We got to learn from our failures. So if our if their failure is they lose sight of our priority, that if our regional priority, which is the benefit from the Army engine plant, if we could maintain visibility and pressure at all levels of decision making, that's an investment in getting the right thing done at the right time, rather than allowing people to get distracted on conflicting priorities. So it's to alleviate future failures and to learn from the past that I'm just seeking an alternative solution that may expedite achieving this on time rather than continuously waiting.
I would say, Councilman McCann, I think the expense of hiring a lobby group located in Washington, D.C. to pull that sled would be in the $75,000 to $100,000 range. And I believe that the project, I mean, we've had the former DEP Commissioner, Gina McCarthy, was in charge of this for years. I mean, we've had every indication that our people who we have working on this should be getting it done. And to throw $75,000 to $100,000 when it's a timing issue in DC, I don't know that we can or should consider paying a top lobby firm what could be $100,000 to help move this forward is prudent.
And I would just, if that's the right figure, because things are scalable, I would just weigh that against the cost of our current methodology, which if this property is worth X dollars to our tax income, that the ROI on providing some fire in the belly would pay for that $100,000 hundreds of times over. Just looking for, it was just an idea, just looking outside the box. How can we work with these entities to get things done at the right time and not just be victims of bureaucratic inertia?
I believe our councilwoman is the chairman of the appropriations committee right now, and
Correct.
we have all sent her emails, and she is incredibly aware of this. And Councilman McCann, if you can give me a guarantee that I can put $100,000 in a Washington, D.C. lobbyist's hands so they can go ahead and lobby 3 branches of government to get it put into a federal budget versus having our congresswoman just submit it, is the right course of action. If I can get that guarantee, I can make a case for the taxpayers to pay for it.
Can I ask a question, Councilwoman?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Kate.
Thank you so much.
Used us to his chair.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Shea.
Thank you. Mr. Timiak, just for a quick review of the timeline for the Army engine plant, it closed in 95, is that correct? Or
That sounds about right.
Closed in 97?
It's been
closed in 97?
It's the last BRAC foreclosure base to be rebuilt. Or yeah.
I thought it closed in 97 and then it remained unused since then. And then
98, 97.
98, 97, okay. And then through 2 different, I'm just trying to walk through the timeline, and then through 2 different administrations, mayoral administrations, there was a delay based on, if someone wants to interpret it as a bureaucratic problem, okay. But then there was a bidding process, I believe, and in both 2008 and 11, and then there was a meeting to Councilman Can in Washington, because this was a big issue in the past 2020 election. That's the only reason why I'm somewhat versed in the topic. And then in 2012, the title flats became an issue, and per the actual timeline that is required, that takes 3 years. So the actual timeline of how we've progressed of getting to a point now, unfortunately has taken a lot of time. That's my point. I do not support $75,000 or $100,000 of creating a different section of the budget to go down and lobby down in Washington. I think that we should be able to do that ourselves as the council and with the mayor's office and work, in step with our elected officials. And I'm excited that we're finally actually having some traction. So that is my comment. But and yes, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro is the chair of appropriations. So we'll be seeing a lot of not just here in Stratford, but in many different municipalities across the entire state. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I hope you are too. That's it.
All right. Thank you for that, Ms. Shake. I suppose we can move on unless anybody has any more questions regarding agencies, other agencies.
My only, excuse me, Chairwoman.
Go ahead.
I do have one question. If it's possible, Mr. Timiak, from the GBT, if we could get a list regarding the actual routes that they were looking to modify, just so we have that, that would be helpful. Because I don't think that was proposed in the last meeting.
Okay, I'll request that.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we can move on from agencies and move to registrar of voters.
Good evening, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Simon.
Happy Patriots Day to everybody.
Good evening.
So the one question that I guess our office was asked was comparing our 2021 budget to the 2022. Obviously, 2021 presented some challenges with regard to COVID and how we conduct our elections. The good thing is that our office did at the time receive a lot of grant money, not only at the state and federal level, but we also received a $31,000 grant from the Center for Tech and Civic Life. If you just look at our budget as it is right now, where it stands, we are going to definitely be under budget if you exclude the COVID costs. If you want to include the COVID costs, it's all been offset by the grants we were able to receive. So we are doing pretty good here in the registrar's office in terms of making sure that obviously the main concern was conducting the election safely. We received 3 separate grants. One was, again, the Center for Tech and Civic Life. One was a Safe Polls grant for $7,500, and the other one was a Secured Polls grant, which we basically sat down with the State of Connecticut Military Department Cybersecurity team, and we went through our cyber issues here in Stratford. And because we did that, and they recommended that to our IT department, some of the protocols that they can take to make sure everything was safe, we received another $5,000 grant on top of everything else. I totaled up our COVID expenditures. Technology, we spent $14,000, and I'll go through that in a little bit. Signage and printing was $7,000. We had signs and all this other literature printed to make sure that when people walked in the polls, they were prepared to maintain social distance and everything like that. Additional help. Now, this is key because obviously with the increase in absentee ballots, we had to have a pretty big crew. Normally, in a presidential year, we'd have around 3,000 ballots that needed to be counted. This year, we had 10,000. So we definitely needed to increase our crew at the absentee ballot level. And we also increased people at the polling locations because we weren't sure. You can never be sure how many people are actually going to show up to the polls. So we had people there wiping down the voting booths and making sure that people maintain their social distance and things like that. And we also spent another $6,000 on additional PPE, which basically, if any of you voted in person, you saw the customer service panels, hand sanitizer in the beginning of the polling location and at the end of the polling location, gloves, masks, face shields. We provided all of our poll workers with anything they could have probably asked for in terms of what was not only required, but double it. I mean, I know the Secretary of State's office said that, most poll workers should be given at least a mask. We gave them customer service shields, we gave them masks, we gave them face shields, so and gloves, obviously. So all of our poll workers were equipped with this. They were trained on how to handle anybody that came into the polling location that didn't want to wear a mask. We offered them one. And they were also tried to do their best to make sure everyone maintained their social distance. So overall, I mean, that's basically it. If you look at our current budget, it represents a 2.76% decrease from last year to this year. And you may be looking at the primary special. You sit there and say, well, why is it increased $2,500? And the main reason is because this year's primary is scheduled to be in, if there is one, it is scheduled to be in September. And being schools are open, most of the time the Board of Education charges us for school rental when their schools are open. When they're not open, they sometimes forget, which is a good thing too. So unfortunately, we'll see what happens this year. The other decrease with the election account was a pretty significant decrease, only because of the fact there's less people that need to be hired, and there's also less printing of ballots that need to happen when it comes to a local compared to a presidential. So those are the main points of our budget, and I'll be happy to answer any other question. Jim, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, let me briefly say, Lou and I come from different parties, but we're totally in agreement on this budget proposal. I'm delighted with the overall decrease over the last several years of about $45,000. That was largely by eliminating one of the 4 people we had working in the office. I think the remaining expenses are prudent. I have some background in getting grants. I'll be eager to try my hand at bringing some money in from that source as well.
Thank you both for that. Appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to questions from the council, and I think I'll go first if I may. Do you feel that the reduction in staff has impacted your office at all?
I could speak for this. I know former finance director Jay Wahlberg before he passed, mentioned the same thing to us when Rick and I were doing the budget about is it a good idea to reduce staff during a presidential? And the strain really did come on election day. It's imperative that we have people that understand how to use the CVRS system, and that's the Connecticut Voter Registration System. And being down that one person on election and primary day does create a little bit of a challenge, but we were able to manage through it. I was pretty impressed with how we were able to get through everything, even though that one person was sorely missed on those particular days and leading up to election as well. Because a lot of people don't understand 2-3 weeks prior to the election, the office gets hundreds and hundreds of phone calls a day, and it's hard when you're down one person. But we did what we could, and obviously one of the things that kind of saved us was the fact that a lot of people weren't able to come into the office as well. So a lot of it was through phones and communicating through emails that we were able to answer people's questions. And obviously we did what we could to help the town clerk's office out as well, because they were very overwhelmed with the amount of applications they received. And there were times earlier on that we were able to help stuff envelopes and stuff, just the ballots into the applications and everything like that for them as well. So we did what we could, and everything went very smooth.
How many transactions does your office handle each fiscal year?
What was that, Councilwoman? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. How many transactions does your office handle each fiscal year?
So it depends on the election. Normally it's at least 7,000 to 10,000. I did a number just this morning, actually, figuring that this was going to, somehow come up in it. And as of today, let me just find that. Hold on 1 minute here. As of today, we have 13,500 transactions from July 1st until April 19th. And what I mean by transactions, that's additions, changes, and removals. People don't realize that we get transactions, we get things online every day, and people actually have been making appointments to come into our office as well. But each one of those additions, changes, and removals requires us to go into the system, make the changes, add them, put them in the voter registration files and everything like that. So far this year has been 13,500.
Wow.
I think
The year's not over. The year's not. This is a very high year after an
the
election.
challenge is that there's so many peaks and valleys as the year goes on. I'm just finding as a newcomer to the office, there's a heavy workload early in the year in terms of the annual canvas we put out. We contact thousands of voters to be sure they're still active. I imagine the workload is going to go down a bit in May and June, but we'll be back up again if and when there's a primary and again in the general election, of course. So there are lots of ups and downs.
So Mr. Simon, I'd like to ask you specifically, how do you find the hours working in the office as compared to, like, you teach as well?
Right now, I'm teaching one online course at Southern Connecticut State University, and I do all of that work on Saturdays and Sundays.
You teach on Saturday and Sundays?
Yeah, if my voice is dropping out, let me take myself off of video. And yeah, so I teach one online course. I never meet with the students. I never go on campus, and I complete all of that work on Saturdays and Sundays.
Okay, because I'm surprised that they offer courses on Saturdays and Sundays.
Again, it's called asymmetrical. You give the students the assignment for the week. They have all week to do it. The work is due on Saturday night, and then you present a new set of assignments on Sunday.
I think you mean asynchronous.
Correct.
Is there anyone else who has a question?
Madam Chair, Bill O'Brien for Mr. DeCilio.
Go ahead, Mr. O'Brien.
Elu, you've been there a long time. Have you ever seen a year like this with a number of people moving out of town and new people moving in town? And how do you keep up with that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the transactions, have been extremely high. I don't think I've ever seen 13,000 transactions so far. And again, the year's not even over. Normally, again, we'll see depending on whether it's a local election or presidentials do get up there, between, and we're talking a fiscal year from July 1st till June 30th. So, but this has been extremely high. And I do believe a lot of it has to do with the new people moving in and people moving out as well. I mean, it's really been people don't realize, you'll see the numbers change. Total registered voters, 36,000. Then they'll drop to 35,500 or something. You say, 500 people. No, it's like 4,500 one way and 5,000 another. So, it's really a lot of transactions that go on in the office that I know a lot of people don't understand and see the detail behind it. And some of those transactions are moves. Some of them are deaths. Some of them are just people changing their address from one part of town to another. Some are changing their names because due to marriage or anything. So changing party affiliation. There's a lot of different transactions that go on that we have to handle, and we have to make sure we keep our, we always get knocked for having the bad telephone numbers, but we're only as good as the people telling us what their new telephone numbers are. So.
Right. Is there anyone else that has questions for registrars?
Greg Can.
Mr. Can, you have the floor.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm looking at the actual expense for fiscal year 2018 of $83,000. That was a mayoral election year. Maybe other things were going on. How does that, let's say, compare to the 51,000 that's budgeted for this upcoming election year?
Greg, I want to say I don't have that in front of me, but I kind of remember going through this one year also when Sue Collier was the finance director, that I think part of it was all grouped together. It wasn't just the election, it was a primary account as well. So I don't have that in front of me. And if I had the account in front of me, you'd probably see a significant, like there's nothing in the primary account. Can't remember the last time the town of Stratford ever went through an election year without having a primary. So I think maybe some of those costs were just misallocated to the election account rather than the primary account. That would be my guess as to why that's so high. Other than that, we've never spent that kind of money on an election.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just something to check. The primary account was about 15 and the regular was 83, which rolls up to about 97,000. And together for this year, between the two types of elections, you're at about 86, which is only $11,000 lower. And if that's appropriate expectation, then we're all good. I just wanted to bring that to light.
Again, without knowing looking back at some of the special elections we've had, it could have been the 120th special election that we had. It could have been a few other ones that, I don't have those numbers in front of me. So rather than me guessing, I can take a look tomorrow and try to get you an answer.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the registrars?
Yes,
Caitlin, Ms. Shake, go ahead.
thank you. Good evening, gentlemen. It's very nice to see both of you. Just in terms of, voter education, is there anything in planning for your department, since, for the most part, we're still in a virtual world, of doing some type of, video recording of how people should come into the office or fill out forms or anything of that nature, which would be maybe helpful, not just for new people that we have coming into town, but if we have any residents who are moving to another address within town, or if they change their name, get married or divorced or whatever the case may be. I want to commend both of you, and actually the entire department in the clerk's office, because of the volume of residents that were, contacting you just for clarification purposes through the entire election process, but also for being quick to respond to those inquiries. So thank you to everyone in the office for doing that. But just maybe as a suggestion, if it's possible, like a 1-minute something. We do have information which has been updated on our website, so thank you to the webmaster. But just as something, and around that topic, when we have our elections, I know here for District 2, and I can only really speak for myself, the signs that we have that are outside the schools or building, if there's a better way to either put, vote here or park here, or to have perhaps that information published onto the Stratford Registrar of Voters of where people are to go to park or vote. Both of those two key information items, that would be part of my feedback. But thank you.
Good ideas. We'll definitely look at them.
Thank you.
Ms. Stancha.
Right. Go ahead, Mr. Pia.
Thank you, Laura. Jim, welcome to the office. I think it's, any registrar's office having both sides represented in there, it's a great checks and balances for the entire industry in process as a whole. So I'll lay it up with a nice 21. How are you guys getting along? Everybody's good, working well together?
That hasn't been a problem at all. I have a lot to learn from Lou. He has a great statewide reputation among the Registrar of Voters Association of Connecticut. We'll have our first meeting, I think, of the Fairfield County group next week. And I have a lot to learn.
I was not the cause of his stitches.
Thank
you. Okay, if there are no further questions, I think the Registrar of Voters is the last on our list. So I'm going to recess this meeting at 8:49 p.m. and we will reconvene on Tuesday, April 20th, tomorrow night, with a whole slew of other departments to talk about. Thanks everyone for participating.